Hey wild hearts. What happens when sworn enemies can't keep their claws, or their eyes, off each other? When two rival alphas are forced to choose between ancient hatred and a love that could destroy everything they've sworn to protect. Welcome to a world where the full moon witnesses more than just transformations. It sees the birth of a passion so dangerous, it could start a war, or end one. Chapter 1. The scent hit Kira Blackthorne like a physical blow the moment she crossed into neutral territory. Pine needles and leather, with an undertone of wild honey that made her wolf pace restlessly beneath her skin. She knew that scent, had memorized it during countless border disputes and tense pack meetings. Damon Silverclaw. Her lip curled in distaste even as her pulse quickened. The Silverclaw Alpha had beaten her here to the Crescent Falls meeting ground, probably hoping to intimidate the neutral pack elders with his arrival. Typical male posturing from the most arrogant wolf she'd ever had the misfortune to know. Kira adjusted the leather jacket that marked her as Blackthorne Alpha, the midnight black material custom-fitted to allow for quick shifting if necessary. At 26, she was the youngest alpha in the Pacific Northwest Territory, a fact that wolves like Damon never let her forget. The clearing ahead buzzed with tension. 3 pack representatives formed an uneasy triangle around the ancient stone circle, where werewolf disputes had been settled for over 2 centuries. But Kira's attention locked immediately on the towering figure standing with his back to her, arms crossed over a broad chest that strained against a charcoal gray Henley. Even in human form, Damon Silverclaw commanded attention. 6'4" of pure predator, with shoulders that could carry a full-grown deer and hands that had snapped more necks than she cared to count. His dark hair was longer than pack tradition usually allowed, touching his collar in waves that caught the late afternoon sunlight. Well, his voice carried across the clearing before he turned around, deep and rich with just enough gravel to make smart women stupid. The little Blackthorne finally decided to show up. Kira's hackles rose. I'm exactly on time, Silverclaw. Maybe you arrived early because you're desperate to get this over with before you embarrass yourself again. When he faced her fully, she felt that familiar jolt of unwanted awareness. Damon had the kind of face that belonged in old paintings of Norse gods. Sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw darkened with stubble, and eyes the color of storm clouds. It would have been perfect if not for the scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw, a souvenir from their last territorial dispute 3 months ago. A scar her claws had given him. Embarrass myself? He stepped closer, and she caught more of that intoxicating scent. The only embarrassing thing here is that the Blackthorne pack thinks they can challenge Silverclaw territory with a pup barely out of her first heat. Fire shot through Kira's veins. She closed the distance between them until they were nearly chest to chest, having to crane her neck to meet his gaze. This pup kicked your ass, remember? Or did that scar scramble your brains along with ruining your pretty face? Something dangerous flashed in Damon's silver eyes. Pretty face? Is that what you think about when you're lying awake at night, little alpha? My face. The air between them crackled with tension so thick the other pack representatives took unconscious steps backward. Kira was acutely aware of the heat radiating from Damon's body, the way her wolf wanted to either submit to his dominance or tear his throat out. Maybe both. I think about how satisfying it was to mark you, she said, her voice dropping to a throaty whisper. How your blood tasted on my claws. Damon's pupils dilated, and she caught the faint scent of arousal beneath his anger. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Then Elder Morrison from the neutral Moonhaven pack cleared his throat loudly. If you two are quite finished with your foreplay, we have territorial disputes to settle. Kira jerked backward as if she'd been slapped, her cheeks burning. She'd let Damon bait her into acting like a horny teenager instead of a pack leader. The smug satisfaction in his eyes made her want to shift and remind him exactly how those claws had felt. The Silverclaws have been encroaching on Blackthorne hunting grounds for 6 weeks, she said, forcing her voice to remain steady as she addressed the elders. They've marked trees along Bitter Creek, well inside our established territory. Bitter Creek has been Silverclaw land for 40 years, Damon countered smoothly. The Blackthorns are the ones pushing boundaries, trying to expand their territory after losing so many members last winter. The low blow hit exactly as he'd intended. Kira's pack had indeed suffered losses during a brutal winter and a hunter attack that had left 12 wolves dead, including her parents. She'd become alpha at 25 not through challenge or inheritance, but through tragedy and necessity. At least my pack doesn't have to resort to intimidation and land grabs to prove their strength, she shot back. Some of us earn respect instead of demanding it through size alone. Damon took another step forward, close enough that she could see the flecks of blue in his storm-gray eyes. Respect? Is that what you call barely holding your territory together? Running a pack into the ground. Red hazed the edges of Kira's vision. Her wolf surged to the surface, lengthening her canines and sharpening her nails into claws. Say that again. Make me. The challenge hung in the air between them like a thrown gauntlet. Every instinct Kira possessed screamed at her to accept, to shift and show this arrogant male exactly why she'd earned her position through blood and fury. But that was exactly what he wanted. For her to lose control in front of the neutral pack elders, to prove she wasn't fit to lead. Instead, she smiled slowly, the expression all teeth and predator satisfaction. I don't need to make you do anything, Silverclaw. Your desperation speaks for itself. Tell me, how many pack members have you lost to challenges this year? I heard at least 3 of your strongest betas are questioning your leadership. Direct hit. Damon's expression went utterly still, but she caught the brief flash of vulnerability before his mask slammed back into place. The rumors were true then. The mighty Silverclaw Alpha wasn't as secure in his position as he pretended. Enough! Elder Morrison stepped between them, his aged face creased with exasperation. This is exactly why the Crescent Falls Accords were written. Personal animosity has no place in territorial negotiations. Elder Hayes from the Riverside Pack nodded agreement. Perhaps we should postpone this meeting until both parties can approach the situation more rationally. No postponement necessary, Damon said, his voice perfectly controlled once again. I propose a simple solution. A hunt competition. Winner takes the disputed territory. Kira's pulse spiked. Hunt competitions were traditional but dangerous, designed to test not just an alpha's tracking and killing skills, but their ability to lead under pressure. What kind of hunt? Solo. 3 days in the Cascade Wilderness. First to bring back proof of an elk kill claims the territory. His smile was all sharp edges. Unless the little alpha is afraid of a fair fight? There's nothing fair about you, she thought, but said, I accept. When do we start? Dawn tomorrow. Meet at the Cascade Trailhead. Damon's gaze raked over her from head to toe, lingering just long enough to make her skin burn. Try not to get lost out there, Blackthorne. It would be a shame if the last of your bloodline fed the ravens. He turned and walked away without another word, his movements fluid and predatory even in human form. Kira watched him go, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. The other pack representatives began discussing terms and neutral observers for the hunt, but their voices faded to background noise. 3 days alone in the wilderness with Damon Silverclaw. 3 days of trying to prove she was worthy of her territory, while fighting the inexplicable pull she felt toward her greatest enemy. 3 days that would either cement her position as alpha or destroy everything she'd worked to protect. As she finally turned to rejoin the conversation, Kira caught a lingering trace of that wild honey scent on the evening breeze. Her wolf responded with a low, hungry whine that had nothing to do with the upcoming hunt and everything to do with the dangerous alpha who'd just walked away. This is going to be a disaster. But even as the thought crossed her mind, anticipation coiled hot and tight in her belly. Because disasters, she was beginning to realize, could be just as addictive as they were destructive. Chapter 2. The Cascade Trailhead looked like something from a postcard at dawn. Mist rising from the valley below, ancient pines reaching toward a sky painted in shades of rose and gold. Kira had arrived 30 minutes early, partly from nerves and partly because she refused to give Damon the satisfaction of keeping her waiting. She'd packed light. Water, emergency rations, a basic first aid kit, and the ceremonial hunting knife passed down through 7 generations of Blackthorn alphas. The rest she'd carry in wolf form once the competition officially began. Her wolf was already restless, pacing beneath her skin and flooding her system with adrenaline. The rumble of a motorcycle engine cut through the morning quiet. Kira straightened as Damon pulled into the small parking area on a black Harley that probably cost more than most pack members made in a year. Even at this distance, she could see the confidence in his posture, the casual way he swung one long leg over the bike and pulled off his helmet. He dressed practically, worn jeans that hugged his thighs, hiking boots, and a forest green thermal that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. A large hunting pack was slung across his back, and she caught the glint of silver at his hip, that marked his own ceremonial blade. "Morning, little Alpha." His greeting carried across the parking area as he approached. "Ready to concede defeat and save us both some time? The only thing I'm ready for is watching you eat crow when I drag an elk back here tomorrow night." Kira adjusted her own pack and stepped onto the trail. "Try to keep up, Silverclaw." She set off at a brisk pace, putting the trailhead and its neutral pack observers behind them. The official rules were simple. First Alpha to return with proof of an elk kill within 72 hours claimed the disputed territory. No interference with each other's hunt, no sabotage, no killing anything but the target prey. Of course, the rules said nothing about psychological warfare. "So," Damon's voice came from directly behind her, far closer than she'd expected. "Tell me about that hunter attack last winter. Must have been traumatic, watching your parents die." Kira stumbled, her stride faltering for just a second before she recovered. "Trying to get inside my head already. That's a bold strategy for someone who's supposed to be hunting elk. Just making conversation. I heard your father took 3 silver bullets before he went down. Heroic, really. Futile, but heroic." White-hot rage flooded Kira's system. She spun around so fast that Damon nearly walked into her, his quick reflexes the only thing preventing a collision. They stood inches apart on the narrow trail, the morning mist swirling around them like ghosts. "Don't you dare talk about my father," she snarled, her canines already extending. "He died protecting his pack. Something a selfish bastard like you wouldn't understand." Damon's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his scent. Surprise. Regret. "I didn't mean." "Yes, you did." Kira stepped closer, using her smaller size to get right up in his personal space. "You meant to hurt me, to throw me off balance before we even reach hunting grounds. Well, congratulations, asshole." Message received. For a moment they stood frozen, breathing each other's air. This close, Kira could see the individual flecks of blue and silver in Damon's eyes, could count the dark lashes that framed them. A pulse beat strong and steady at the base of his throat, and she fought the insane urge to lean forward and taste his skin. "What is wrong with you?" she demanded of herself. "He just insulted your dead father, and you're thinking about licking him?" "Kira, don't." She backed away before he could finish whatever he'd been about to say. "Save your breath for the hunt, Silverclaw. You're going to need it." She turned and jogged up the trail, leaving him behind in the swirling mist. Her wolf was agitated now, confused by the mix of anger and arousal coursing through their shared system. The beast wanted to fight, to establish dominance through tooth and claw. But beneath that familiar aggression lay something else, a deep, aching need that had nothing to do with territory or pack politics. The trail wound steadily upward through old-growth forest, past moss-covered boulders and fallen logs that spoke of centuries of storms and seasons. Kira had trained in these mountains since she was old enough to hold her wolf form for more than a few minutes. Every stream crossing and game trail was familiar territory, giving her a significant advantage over Damon's raw power and speed. At least, that had been the plan. 2 hours into the hike, she realized he was still behind her. Not close enough to make conversation, but near enough that she could catch his scent on every shift of the wind. The knowledge that he was back there, probably watching the way her ass moved in her hiking pants, made her skin feel too tight. Focus, she told herself. Elk are what matter here. Find the herd, make the kill, get home. She paused at a creek crossing to drink and check her map, though she knew exactly where she was going. The main elk population spent their days in a series of meadows about 6 miles ahead, accessible by 2 different trail systems. If she pushed hard, she could be in position by late afternoon. The snap of a branch behind her made her look up. Damon emerged from the tree line like something out of a nature documentary, all fluid grace and predatory focus. He'd pulled his dark hair back with a leather tie, revealing the strong column of his neck and the scar she'd given him. Taking a break already? He crouched beside the stream about 10 feet upstream, cupping the clear water in his hands. And here I thought Blackthorn wolves were supposed to be tireless, just staying hydrated. Kira capped her water bottle and shouldered her pack. Dehydration makes people do stupid things, like accept hunt challenges they can't win, or like assume they know these mountains better than someone who's been running them since before you hit puberty. The casual insult stung, but not as much as the implication behind it. You've been hunting in Cascade territory? That's a violation of the Accords. Damon straightened slowly, water dripping from his fingers. Not hunting little alpha. Running. Sometimes a wolf needs space to think, and neutral territory offers privacy. There was something in his tone that made her look at him more closely. Beneath the arrogance and casual cruelty, she glimpsed something almost vulnerable. The rumors about challenges to his leadership suddenly seemed more significant. "Trouble in paradise?" she asked before she could stop herself. His expression shuddered immediately. "Nothing I can't handle." Unlike some alphas who inherited their position through tragedy instead of earning it through strength. The words hit Kira like a physical blow. Her pack was already vulnerable, weakened from last winter's losses. If hunters struck while she was away, her wolves wouldn't stand a chance. "How do you know this?" Damon demanded, his entire demeanor shifting into battle mode. "One of our scouts spotted their camp during a routine patrol. Military-grade equipment, professional setup, detailed maps of both Blackthorne and Silverclaw territories." Morrison's face was etched with worry. "This isn't a random hunting party. It's an organized strike force." Kira's mind raced through possibilities and logistics. "How long do we have?" "Hard to say. They were still in planning stages when our scout reported back, but that was 4 hours ago." "We have to get back," she said, already mentally calculating travel time. "Both of us. Right now." "Agreed." Damon was checking his gear with the efficient movements of someone preparing for war. "The competition is over. Our pack's survival takes priority." Elder Morrison nodded approvingly. "What should we tell the neutral packs about the territorial dispute?" Kira looked at Damon, seeing her own determination reflected in his storm-gray eyes. Whatever was happening between them personally would have to wait. Their wolves needed them. "Tell them we're tabling the discussion until after we deal with the hunter threat," she said. "Both packs will maintain current boundaries and focus on mutual defense." "Mutual defense?" One of the younger wolves spoke up, surprise clear in his voice. "The Blackthorn and Silverclaw packs are forming an alliance?" "Temporary alliance," Damon corrected smoothly. "United response to a common threat." But Kira caught the look he gave her, and she knew they were both thinking the same thing. Nothing about what was developing between them felt temporary. "We'll take the direct route back," she said, shouldering her pack. "Can you get word to both packs that we're coming?" "Already sent runners," Morrison replied. "Your people should be expecting you within 6 hours." They left the elk carcass for the scavengers and set off at a pace that would have been punishing for humans, but was merely urgent for werewolves. Kira pushed her body to its limits, driven by images of her pack under siege while she'd been playing hunting games in the mountains. "Talk to me about your defenses," Damon said as they jogged side by side down a switchbacking trail. "How many fighters do you have?" 8 who can handle themselves in a real fight. Maybe 12 if you count the younger wolves. The numbers sounded pathetic compared to what they might be facing. "What about Silverclaw?" 22 active fighters, but half of them are out on various assignments. "I can probably call back 10 in time to make a difference." Which meant they'd have roughly 20 wolves against an unknown number of professional hunters with silver bullets and military equipment. Not exactly encouraging odds. "We need a strategy," Kira said. "Something better than charging in and hoping for the best." "Agreed. What do you know about the terrain around your territory?" "Choke points, defensible positions, places where we could funnel them into a killing zone." The casual way he said, "We sent a flutter through her chest despite everything else happening. There's a narrow canyon on the eastern border where the access road runs through a bottleneck. If we could lure them there." "Perfect. My wolves are experienced in coordinated assault tactics. If yours can handle the technical aspects, communications, evacuation routes, medical support, we might actually pull this off." They ran in focused silence for the next hour, both lost in tactical planning and worst-case scenarios. But despite the crisis, Kira couldn't help noticing how perfectly their strides matched, how they naturally fell into the easy rhythm of pack members running together. Whatever else happened, they made a good team. "Kira," Damon's voice made her look over. "About what happened back there. The kiss. Not exactly the best timing for this conversation. Maybe not. But I need you to know, whatever happens with our packs, whatever comes next, I don't regret it." Heat bloomed in her chest. "Even though it complicates everything?" "Especially because it complicates everything." His smile was quick and fierce. "I've spent 6 years being the perfect alpha, making decisions based purely on pack welfare and political necessity. For once in my life, I did something because I wanted to. Because you're extraordinary and fierce, and I couldn't stop myself from kissing you even though I knew it would change everything. Damon, I know we have bigger problems right now. But when this is over, when our people are safe, I want to explore what this could be. If you're willing. Before she could answer, they crested a ridge and saw smoke rising from the valley below. Not the thin wisps of cooking fires or controlled burns, but thick black columns that spoke of destruction and violence. They were too late. No. The word tore from Kira's throat as she spotted the source of the smoke. Buildings in the Blackthorne compound were burning, and she could hear the distant sound of gunfire echoing off the valley walls. Without thinking, she shifted mid-stride. Her wolf form hit the ground running, for legs carrying her faster than human legs ever could toward the scene of devastation below. Behind her, she heard Damon's answering howl as he shifted to match her pace. Together they raced down the mountainside, two alphas desperate to reach their people before it was too late. And as they ran, Kira found herself clinging to the memory of Damon's words like a lifeline. When this is over, when our people are safe, I want to explore what this could be. First, though, they had to make sure there would be an after to explore. Chapter 3. The elk herd was exactly where Kira had expected to find them, grazing in Summit Meadow as the afternoon sun slanted through the pines. She counted at least 20 animals from her concealed position behind a fallen log, including several mature bulls whose antlers would provide the proof she needed. But something was wrong. The herd was agitated, ears constantly swiveling and heads lifting to test the air. A few of the older cows had positioned themselves between the calves and the forest edge, their bodies tense with protective instinct. Either the elk had caught her scent despite her careful approach from downwind, or something else was out there. Something else named Damon Silverclaw. The thought had barely formed when she spotted him, a shadow moving through the trees on the far side of the meadow. He'd approached from the opposite direction, probably hoping to flush the herd toward his position while she was still getting into place. The bastard was trying to steal her hunt. Kira's wolf snarled with outrage. She'd tracked this herd for hours, using every skill her father had taught her about reading sign and predicting animal behavior. If Damon thought he could swoop in and claim her work. A sharp crack echoed across the meadow as one of the bulls stamped his hoof in alarm. The entire herd lifted their heads in unison, nostrils flaring. They'd definitely caught predator scent now, and in seconds they'd bolt for the trees. Without thinking, Kira burst from cover. Her clothes dissolved in tatters as she shifted mid-sprint, her human form flowing seamlessly into that of a coal-black wolf with silver eyes. Her paws hit the meadow floor running, muscles coiling and extending as she closed the distance to the nearest bull. The elk scattered like startled birds, but her target was a magnificent 6-point buck who'd hesitated a crucial second too long. Kira launched herself at his throat, jaws gaping wide. At the last second, the bull twisted away, and her teeth scraped harmlessly along his neck instead of finding the killing grip she'd needed. He bounded away with blood streaming from the shallow wound, leaving Kira skidding to a halt in the churned grass. Around her, hoofbeats faded into the distance as the entire herd disappeared into the forest. She'd blown it, completely and spectacularly. Congratulations, she thought bitterly. You just turned a perfect hunting opportunity into a disaster because you let your temper make the decisions. A low rumble of amusement made her spin around. Damon stepped out of the tree line in human form, still fully clothed and completely relaxed. His storm-gray eyes were bright with laughter as he surveyed the empty meadow. Well, that was impressive, he said, clapping slowly. Really showed that elk who was boss. I especially liked the part where you missed his throat by 6 inches. Mortification burned through Kira's system. She shifted back to human form, immediately regretting the decision when she realized her shredded clothes provided exactly 0 coverage. Damon's gaze raked over her naked body once before he deliberately looked away, but not before she caught the flash of heat in his eyes. Turn around, she snapped, using her hands to provide what modesty she could. Kind of hard to have a conversation with your back, he replied, but he obediently faced the forest. Besides, it's nothing I haven't seen before. All wolves shift, Kira. Bodies are just bodies. Not mine, she thought as she scrambled to gather the remains of her shirt. The thermal was mostly intact if she tied the torn pieces together, and her sports bra had survived the transformation. Her jeans were a loss, but she always carried spare clothes in her pack. You can look now, she said once she'd pulled on her backup outfit. When Damon turned back around, His expression was carefully neutral. Feel better. I'd feel better if you hadn't screwed up my hunt. What the hell were you doing out there? The rules specifically state no interference. I wasn't interfering. I was hunting. He gestured toward the far side of the meadow. That's public territory, little Alpha. I have as much right to be here as you do. You spooked them on purpose. I spooked them. Damon raised an eyebrow. You're the one who went charging across open ground like a rookie. When was the last time you actually made a kill yourself instead of letting your betas handle the hunting? The question hit uncomfortably close to home. As Alpha, Kira spent most of her time managing pack politics, territory disputes, and human relations. Her hunting skills had gotten rusty from disuse, a fact that had just been demonstrated with embarrassing clarity. At least I tried, she shot back. Where's your elk, hotshot? Patience, little Alpha. The day is young. Damon shouldered his pack and started walking toward the forest. Besides, I'm not the one who just alerted every predator in a 5-mile radius that there are werewolves in the area. Good luck finding another herd after that display. He was right, damn him. Her failed attack had sent the elk fleeing in panic, and the scent of their fear would linger for hours. Any other prey animals in the immediate area would be on high alert, making a successful hunt nearly impossible until things settled down. This is all your fault, she muttered, falling into step behind him as he headed for a game trail that led deeper into the mountains. My fault that you have no patience? My fault that you let anger cloud your judgment. Damon paused to examine a broken branch, his fingers tracing the fresh damage. Face it, Kira. You're not ready for this kind of challenge. You should have stayed home and let one of your betas handle things. I don't have any betas strong enough to face you in a hunt, she admitted before thinking better of it. The words hung in the air between them like a confession. Damon turned to study her face, something unreadable flickering in his expression. What happened to them? Your betas, I mean. For a moment, Kira considered telling him to mind his own business. But something in his tone, not mockery this time, just genuine curiosity, made her answer honestly. Marcus and Jake died in the hunter attack with my parents. Sarah challenged me for Alpha right after the funerals, and when I won, she left to join the Portland pack. She kept her voice matter-of-fact, but the words still stung. The wolves I have now are good people, but they're young, untested, and you're trying to hold everything together by yourself. It wasn't a question. Someone has to. Kira pushed past him on the narrow trail. Not all of us have the luxury of a stable pack with established leadership structures. Stable. Damon made a sound that might have been laughter. Is that what you think Silverclaw is? Before she could ask what he meant, a new scent hit her nostrils, rich and musky with an undertone of aggression. Bear. And close. Damon caught it at the same time, his body going utterly still. Grizzly, he said quietly. Big one. Male. They both froze, listening for sounds of movement in the underbrush. Bears usually avoided werewolves, but during mating season, or if they were protecting territory, a grizzly could become dangerously aggressive. And this deep in the wilderness, there was nowhere to run. A branch cracked somewhere off the trail to their left. Then another, closer this time. Whatever was out there was big enough to push through the forest without bothering to go around obstacles. There, Damon breathed, pointing toward a gap in the trees about 50 yards ahead. Kira saw it a second later, a massive brown shape moving parallel to the trail. The bear was at least 7 feet tall at the shoulder, with the dished face and prominent hump that marked it as a mature grizzly. Even from this distance, she could see the way its muscles rippled beneath thick fur as it moved. Should we shift? She whispered. Not unless we have to. Grizzlies respect wolves more than humans, but they'll still fight if they feel threatened. Damon's hand moved slowly toward the hunting knife at his belt. Just stay calm and keep moving. Most of the time they'll leave us alone if we don't challenge them. They resumed walking, every step measured and deliberate. The bear continued its path through the forest, sometimes visible through gaps in the trees and sometimes hidden completely. But they could hear it, the heavy tread of massive paws, the occasional grunt or snuffle as it investigated interesting scents. We need to get to higher ground, Damon said after they'd been walking in tense silence for 10 minutes. There's a rocky outcrop about half a mile ahead where we can wait this out. Kira nodded, not trusting her voice. Her wolf was a mess of conflicting instincts. Wanting to run, wanting to fight, wanting to shift and establish dominance over the massive predator tracking their movements. Only the calming presence of another strong wolf kept her animal side from taking control. The irony wasn't lost on her. Here she was, depending on her greatest enemy for protection from a threat that could kill them both. They climbed steadily for another 20 minutes, the trail growing steeper and rockier as they gained elevation. The bear sounds faded behind them, replaced by the whisper of wind through pine needles and the distant cry of a hawk. Just as Kira was beginning to relax, Damon's hand shot out to grab her arm. "Don't move," he said, his voice barely audible. She followed his gaze and felt her blood turn to ice. The grizzly stood on the trail ahead of them, close enough to see the individual scars on its muzzle and the way saliva dripped from its open mouth. It had circled around somehow, cutting off their escape route to higher ground. The bear rose up on its hind legs, towering 9 feet tall as it tested their scent. A low growl rumbled from its chest, the sound vibrating through the ground beneath their feet. This wasn't curiosity anymore. This was a threat display from a predator that had decided they were trespassing in its territory. Damon's grip on her arm tightened. "When I say run," he whispered, "head for those rocks on the left. Don't look back, don't stop, don't try to help me. Just run. I'm not leaving you to face that thing alone. You're not strong enough to help in a fight, and we both know it." His words stung, but she couldn't deny the truth behind them. "If this goes bad, one of us needs to survive to warn our packs about the bear." The grizzly dropped back to all fours and took a step toward them, lips pulling back to reveal yellowed fangs as long as Kira's fingers. Another step, then another. 20 feet. 15. "Run," Damon said. But instead of running, Kira did the stupidest thing possible. She stepped forward, placing herself between Damon and 800 pounds of irritated grizzly, and shifted into her wolf form. The transformation rippled through her like lightning, human thoughts scattering as her wolf's instincts took control. She was smaller than the bear, weaker, but she was fast and she was desperate. More importantly, she was protecting her pack member. The classification felt wrong even in her wolf's simplified thinking, but it was the closest concept available. The grizzly roared, a sound like thunder in the confined space of the forest trail. It charged, closing the distance between them in 3 massive strides. Kira leaped to meet it, jaws snapping for its throat even as claws the size of railroad spikes raked across her ribs. Pain exploded through her system, but her wolf barely registered it. She twisted away from another swipe and darted behind the bear, looking for an opening. Her teeth found purchase in its rear leg, and she bit down with everything she had. The grizzly spun faster than anything that large should have been able to move. A massive paw caught her across the head, sending her tumbling into the underbrush. Stars exploded behind her eyes, and for a moment she couldn't tell which way was up. When her vision cleared, she saw Damon in full wolf form, a massive silver-gray beast with yellow eyes like molten gold. He was larger than her by at least 50 pounds, all muscle and predatory grace as he circled the confused bear. His hackles were raised, lips pulled back in a snarl that would have sent most threats running. But grizzlies weren't most threats. The bear swiped at Damon with claws extended, missing by inches as he danced away. He darted in to snap at its front leg, then immediately retreated before it could retaliate. It was a dangerous game, wearing down a larger opponent through speed and precision strikes. Kira struggled to her feet, her ribs screaming in protest. Blood matted the fur along her side where the bear's claws had found their mark, but nothing felt broken. She could still fight. The grizzly was focused entirely on Damon now, treating him as the primary threat, which gave her the opening she needed. She came at the bear from behind and slightly to the side, going for the killing bite at the base of its skull. Her jaws clamped down with bone-crushing force, and the grizzly's roar of pain echoed through the forest. It reared up on its hind legs, trying to shake her off, but she held on grimly. Damon saw the opening and took it. His jaws found the bear's throat, and together they brought the massive predator crashing to the ground. It took several long minutes of sustained pressure before the grizzly's struggles finally ceased. When it was over, both wolves collapsed beside their kill, panting heavily. Kira's wounds had already begun to heal thanks to her supernatural metabolism, but exhaustion made her limbs feel like lead. She'd never fought anything that large before, never had to coordinate an attack with another wolf while her life hung in the balance. And she'd never, ever, felt anything like the fierce satisfaction of hunting as a team with Damon Silverclaw. They shifted back to human form simultaneously, both naked and blood-streaked and alive. For a long moment, they just stared at each other across the bear's still form, the weight of what had just happened settling between them. "You complete idiot," Damon said finally. "That thing could have killed you. It could have killed you too." Kira touched the shallow scratches along her ribs, already mostly healed. "Why did you tell me to run? You had to know I wouldn't leave you." Something flickered in his expression, surprise, maybe, or something deeper she couldn't identify. "I thought most alphas would have taken the chance to eliminate a rival." The words hung in the air like an accusation. Kira felt heat rise in her cheeks as she realized what he was implying. That she'd chosen to fight beside him instead of letting the bear solve her territorial problems permanently. "Most alphas are idiots," she said finally. "Besides, bears don't follow pack law. If that thing had killed you, it would have come for me next." "Right. Self-preservation." But he didn't sound convinced, and the way he was looking at her made something twist in her chest. They dressed in silence, both hyper-aware of the other's presence in a way that had nothing to do with territorial disputes or hunting competitions. When Damon bent to retrieve his shirt, Kira found herself staring at the play of muscles across his back, at the way sweat made his skin gleam in the dappled sunlight. "We should move," he said without looking at her. "The scent of blood will draw scavengers." Kira nodded, shouldering her pack. "There's a stream about a mile north where we can clean up and refill our water." They left the bear carcass for the ravens and coyotes, following a deer trail that wound through increasingly dense forest. Neither spoke about what had happened, but the silence felt different now, charged with something that made Kira's skin tingle and her wolf pace restlessly. She'd saved his life. He'd saved hers. Somewhere in the space between those two facts, the familiar hostility had shifted into something far more dangerous. "Kira." Damon's voice made her look back. He'd stopped walking and was staring at her with an expression she'd never seen before, intense and almost vulnerable. "Thank you for not running." Before she could respond, he turned away and resumed walking, leaving her to follow with her heart racing and her carefully maintained hatred cracking like ice in spring. Chapter 4. The stream Kira had promised turned out to be more of a creek, barely 3 feet wide and ankle deep. But the water was clear and cold enough to numb the lingering ache in her ribs. She knelt on the rocky bank and splashed her face, washing away the dried blood and forest debris that clung to her skin. 20 feet upstream, Damon was doing the same thing, though he'd stripped off his shirt to reveal the long scratches the bear had left across his shoulder blades. The wounds were already healing, but they still looked painful. "You should clean those," she called, then immediately regretted speaking. The last thing she needed was to sound like she cared about his welfare. "They're fine." But he winced as he twisted to examine the deepest cut. "Just scratches. Infected scratches will slow you down tomorrow. Do you want to lose this competition because you're too stubborn to accept basic medical advice?" Damon was quiet for a long moment, then sighed. "Do you have antiseptic in that pack of yours?" Kira retrieved her first aid kit and moved upstream, trying to ignore the way her pulse quickened as she approached him. This close, she could see that the scratches were deeper than he'd let on, long gouges that would leave scars if they weren't treated properly. "Turn around," she said, pulling out sterile gauze and antiseptic wipes. He complied without argument, presenting his back to her with the unconscious trust of one predator to another. The gesture should have meant nothing, but Kira found herself staring at the breadth of his shoulders, at the way muscle moved beneath skin marked with old scars and new wounds. "This is going to sting," she warned, then began cleaning the first scratch. Damon hissed between his teeth, but didn't pull away. "Where did you learn field medicine?" "My mother was a paramedic before she married into the pack. She taught me the basics." Kira's hands moved steadily, professional despite the way her wolf responded to his nearness. "Said you never knew when alpha duties would require playing doctor. Smart woman. I can see where you get your stubbornness." The comment was mild, almost teasing, and completely unlike the cutting remarks he usually made. Kira paused in her work, studying the back of his neck where dark hair curled against tanned skin. "Was that almost a compliment, Silverclaw? Don't let it go to your head, little alpha." But there was no heat in the words, and when she resumed cleaning his wounds, she could have sworn she felt him relax under her touch. They fell into comfortable silence, the only sounds the babble of the creek and the whisper of wind through pine needles. "There." Kira applied the last bandage and stepped back. "Try not to rip them open in the next 24 hours. When Damon turned around, he was close enough that she could see the flecks of blue in his storm-gray eyes, could count the individual stubble whiskers along his jaw. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Then thunder rumbled in the distance, and they both looked up at a sky that had turned ominously dark while they weren't paying attention. "Storm coming," Damon observed. "A big one from the look of those clouds." Kira groaned. The last thing they needed was to be caught in a downpour with no shelter, especially after the energy they'd expended fighting the bear. "There's a ranger station about 2 miles east, but it's probably locked. I know these mountains, remember? There's a hunting cabin closer than that, maybe half a mile through the trees." Damon shouldered his pack as the first fat raindrops began to fall. "We can wait out the storm there." They made it to the cabin just as the sky opened up in earnest. It was a simple structure, maybe 12 feet square, with a stone fireplace and 2 sets of bunk beds that had seen better days. A coating of dust suggested it hadn't been used in months, but the roof looked solid and there was a stack of dry firewood beside the hearth. "Not exactly the Ritz," Damon said as he shook rain from his hair, "but it'll do." Outside, the storm intensified. Lightning flickered through the single window, followed by thunder that shook the cabin's frame. Rain hammered on the metal roof like machine gun fire, turning the forest into a gray wall of water and shadow. Kira set her pack down and surveyed their temporary shelter. 1 room, 2 people who'd spent the day trying to kill each other, and a storm that could last hours. This was either going to be very awkward or very dangerous. Possibly both. "I'll get a fire started," Damon said, apparently thinking along the same lines. "We should dry our clothes before hypothermia becomes an issue." It was a practical suggestion, but it meant they'd be spending the evening in whatever spare clothes they'd packed. Or in Kira's case, since her backup outfit was already soaked, probably wrapped in one of the musty blankets she'd spotted on the upper bunk. She rummaged through her pack while Damon coaxed flames from the dry kindling. Her spare shirt was damp but wearable, and she had clean underwear, but her backup jeans had gotten soaked when a leak in her pack's waterproofing had let rain seep through, which left her with hiking shorts that barely covered her thighs and nothing else. "Problem?" Damon asked, glancing over his shoulder. "Just wardrobe issues." Kira held up the damp jeans. "I may have to raid the cabin's linens if you're planning to stay decent. We're both adults, Kira. I think we can handle a little skin without losing our minds." The casual way he said her name, without the usual mocking edge, made something flutter in her chest. She changed quickly while his attention was focused on the fire, hyper-aware of every movement and the way the thin shorts clung to her still damp skin. When she turned around, Damon had stripped down to boxer briefs and a tank top that left very little to the imagination. The firelight played across the defined muscles of his arms and chest, turning old scars into silver lines against golden skin. She tried not to stare, but her wolf was purring with approval, and certain parts of her anatomy were responding in ways that had nothing to do with the warmth from the fire. "Better?" he asked, hanging his wet clothes from a makeshift line he'd strung between 2 wall hooks. "Much." Her voice came out slightly hoarse, and she cleared her throat. "How long do you think the storm will last?" "Most of the night, probably. Mountain weather can be unpredictable, but that looked like a serious front moving through." Damon settled onto the lower bunk across from where she sat. "We should eat something and try to get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." They shared rations in companionable silence, the crackling fire and drumming rain creating an oddly intimate atmosphere. Without the constant posturing and territorial disputes, Kira found herself actually relaxing in Damon's presence for the first time since they'd met. "Can I ask you something?" she said finally. He gestured for her to continue. "What you said earlier, about the Silverclaw pack not being stable. What did you mean?" Damon was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully neutral. 3 of my strongest wolves have challenged me in the past 6 months. All of them citing my inability to expand pack territory as justification. "They want you to take over neighboring packs?" "They want me to take over your pack." He met her eyes across the small space. "Some of them think the Blackthorns are weak enough now that a direct assault would succeed with minimal casualties." Ice formed in Kira's stomach. "Are they right? Honestly?" "Probably." Damon leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You lost your 3 strongest fighters last winter. Your remaining wolves are loyal but inexperienced. In a straight fight, Silverclaw would win." The blunt assessment hurt, but she couldn't deny its accuracy. So why haven't you attacked? Because war is expensive, even when you win. Pack members die, territory gets damaged, and you end up with survivors who resent being conquered. He shrugged. I prefer intimidation to actual violence. Usually being the key word. Everyone has limits, little alpha. Even me. Something in his tone made her study his face more carefully. There were lines around his eyes that spoke of stress and sleepless nights, a tension in his shoulders that suggested he carried more weight than he showed the world. The challenges, she said slowly. They're not just about territory, are they? Someone wants your position. My cousin Marcus has been making noise about new leadership for a new generation. He thinks I'm too old-fashioned, too willing to negotiate instead of simply taking what we want. Damon's smile was sharp and humorless. He's probably right about that too. How old are you? The question slipped out before she could stop it. 32. Ancient by werewolf standards, right? Kira snorted. Hardly. My grandfather led the Blackthorne pack until he was 73. Experience matters in leadership. Tell that to Marcus. He's convinced the pack would be better served by someone with vision and ambition. Damon's fingers traced patterns on the worn wood of the bunk frame. Sometimes I wonder if he's right. Maybe the pack does need someone more aggressive, more willing to expand through conquest. And maybe my pack needs someone stronger, more experienced, better at politics. Kira tucked her feet under her, suddenly cold despite the fire's warmth. Maybe we're both imposters playing at being alpha. They looked at each other across the flickering firelight, two young leaders carrying the weight of entire communities on their shoulders. For a moment, the rivalry and territorial disputes fell away, leaving only shared understanding and bone-deep exhaustion. We make quite a pair, Damon said softly. Speak for yourself. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Are you? Because from where I sit, it looks like you're terrified of failing everyone who depends on you. Just like me. The words hit closer to home than Kira wanted to admit. I'm not terrified of anything. Liar. But he said it gently, without heat. You're scared that you're not strong enough, smart enough, experienced enough to keep your pack safe. You wake up every morning wondering if today's the day someone realizes you have no idea what you're doing. Stop. The word came out sharper than she'd intended. You lie awake at night cataloging every mistake, every decision that could have been better, every wolf who might still be alive if you'd been faster or stronger or... I said stop. Kira was on her feet without remembering standing, hands clenched into fists at her sides. You don't know anything about me. I know everything about you. Damon stood as well, closing the distance between them until they were close enough to touch. Because I am you, Kira. Different pack, different circumstances, but the same fears. The same crushing weight of responsibility for lives we're not sure we can protect. You're wrong. But her voice lacked conviction, and they both knew it. Am I? Then why are you here, competing in a hunt you know you can't win, instead of sending one of your wolves to handle negotiations? Because the words died in her throat as she realized he was right. She was here because she couldn't bear to look weak, couldn't stand the thought of hiding behind others when her pack's territory was at stake. Even if it meant failing spectacularly in front of her greatest rival. Because you'd rather fail personally than risk someone else's failure reflecting on your leadership, Damon finished. Just like I'd rather face 3 challenges in 6 months than admit I might not be the best alpha for my pack. They stared at each other in the firelight, breathing hard as if they'd been fighting instead of talking. The air between them crackled with tension that had nothing to do with pack politics, and everything to do with the dangerous intimacy of shared vulnerability. This is insane, Kira whispered. We're enemies. Are we? Damon lifted one hand to cup her cheek, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. Because right now, you feel more like the only person in the world who understands what I'm going through. She should pull away. Should remind him about the territorial dispute and the hunting competition and all the reasons they could never be anything but rivals. Instead, she found herself leaning into his touch, her eyes drifting closed as warmth spread through her system like honey. Damon, she breathed. I know. Trust me, I know how crazy this is. His voice was rough with something that might have been desire or desperation or both. But I can't stop thinking about you. About this. About what it would be like if we weren't. Thunder crashed overhead, so loud it seemed to shake the cabin's foundation. The sound broke whatever spell had been weaving around them, and Kira jerked backward, putting physical distance between them even as her wolf whined in protest. "We should get some sleep," she said, not meeting his eyes. "Early start tomorrow." Damon's hand dropped to his side. "Right, the competition." She climbed into the upper bunk and turned toward the wall, pulling the musty blanket up to her chin. Below her, she heard Damon settle onto the lower bunk with a soft sigh. The fire crackled and the rain continued its assault on the roof, but the easy camaraderie they'd shared was gone, replaced by a tension that made her skin feel too tight. "What is wrong with you?" she demanded silently. "He's your rival, your enemy, the last person you should be having feelings for." But even as she repeated the familiar litany, Kira couldn't forget the vulnerability in his eyes when he'd talked about his pack's challenges, or the way her whole body had responded to his touch. Couldn't stop thinking about what might have happened if that thunder hadn't interrupted them. Hours later, as the storm finally began to ease, she was still staring at the cabin's rough-hewn wall and wondering if she was falling for the one wolf who could destroy everything she'd worked to protect. Chapter 5. Kira woke to the smell of coffee and bacon, which was impossible since they were in the middle of the wilderness with nothing but energy bars and trail mix. For a moment she lay still, wondering if she was dreaming. Then the scent of pine needles and wild honey flooded her senses, and everything came rushing back. The cabin, the storm, Damon's hand on her face, and the way her entire world had tilted on its axis. She sat up carefully, peering over the edge of the upper bunk. Damon was crouched beside the fire, tending what looked like an actual breakfast. A small camping stove sat on the floor beside him, and she could see packages that definitely hadn't come from either of their basic supply packs. "Where did you get all that?" she asked, voice still rough with sleep. "Emergency cache. I stashed supplies here last spring during a scouting run." He glanced up at her, his expression carefully neutral in the morning light. "Figured if we were stuck together for the night, we might as well eat something better than granola bars." Kira climbed down from the bunk, suddenly aware that she was wearing nothing but hiking shorts and a thin tank top. Damon's gaze flicked over her once before he pointedly focused on the cooking bacon, but she caught the tightening around his eyes that said he wasn't as unaffected as he pretended to be. "Coffee," he offered, holding up a steaming mug. "Please." She accepted the drink gratefully, wrapping her hands around the warm ceramic. The first sip was perfection, strong and bitter with just a hint of sweetness. "Thank you." They ate in relative silence, both clearly thinking about what had almost happened the night before. In daylight, with the storm past and the hunting competition looming, the moment of connection felt surreal, like something that had happened to other people. "We should talk about last night," Damon said finally. "What about it?" Kira kept her voice carefully light. "Two people got caught in a storm and shared a shelter. Nothing unusual about that." "Kira, the competition resumes in less than an hour." She stood abruptly, gathering her still damp clothes from the makeshift line. "We both need to focus on finding elk instead of whatever that was." Damon was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was back to its usual controlled cadence. "You're right, of course. We have obligations to our packs." Obligations. The word sat heavy in her chest as she changed into her dry clothes, grateful for the privacy of the cabin's single corner. By the time she turned around, Damon had cleaned up their breakfast and was shouldering his pack. "The elk will have moved after yesterday's disturbance," he said, back in full hunting mode. "Probably north toward the alpine meadows, or south toward the river bottomland." Kira checked her gear one final time. "Better cover down there, easier to find water. Want to make it interesting? First one to find fresh sign gets to claim the more promising territory." The challenge sparked her competitive instincts despite everything else swirling between them. "You're on. What does the winner get besides first pick of hunting grounds?" Damon's smile was sharp and predatory. "Bragging rights. And the knowledge that they're clearly the superior tracker." "Deal." Kira headed for the door, then paused with her hand on the latch. "For what it's worth, yesterday, with the bear, that was good teamwork." It was. Something soft flickered in his expression. "Stay safe out there, little alpha." "You too." She stepped out into the morning air, crisp and clean after the storm. The forest smelled of rain and growing things, with that particular freshness that only came after a good washing. Birds called from the treetops, and somewhere in the distance she could hear the chatter of a squirrel defending its territory. It should have been perfect hunting weather. Instead, All Kira could think about was the way Damon had looked at her in the firelight, like she was something precious instead of a rival to be defeated. Focus, she told herself firmly. Elk first, emotional crisis later. She set off north at a steady pace, following game trails that wound through stands of towering pine and across meadows still heavy with morning dew. Every few hundred yards she paused to check for sign. Hoof prints in soft earth, bark rubbed from trees, the distinctive scent markers that would tell her which way the herd had moved. For the first hour, she found nothing but old tracks and cold scent trails. The elk had definitely been through this area, but not recently. She was beginning to think Damon's southern route might be the better choice when she spotted something that made her heart race. Fresh droppings. Still warm, which meant the animals had passed through within the last few hours. Kira knelt beside the evidence, studying the size and composition. Definitely elk, and from a good-sized herd based on the quantity. She followed the trail markers north, excitement building as the signs grew fresher. Broken branches at shoulder height, where the animals had pushed through dense undergrowth. Hoof prints in a muddy stream crossing that were so recent water was still seeping into the depressions. She was close, very close. The trail led through a narrow valley between two ridgelines, the kind of terrain elk preferred for its combination of cover and easy escape routes. Kira moved more cautiously now, testing the wind direction and watching for any sign of movement ahead. That's when she caught the scent. Not elk. Wolf. Damon. He was somewhere ahead of her, probably following the same trail system from the southern approach, which meant they were both closing in on the same herd, and whoever got there first would have the advantage of choosing the best hunting position. Kira abandoned stealth for speed, jogging along the game trail as quickly as she dared. The scent of elk grew stronger with every step, mixed now with the musk of rutting season and the sharp tang of territorial markings. She was almost there. The trail crested a small rise, and she found herself looking down into a hidden valley where at least 30 elk grazed in the morning sunlight. Bulls, cows, and several calves spread across an alpine meadow that looked like something from a postcard. It was perfect, isolated, with good sight lines and multiple approach routes. It was also occupied. Damon emerged from the tree line on the far side of the meadow at almost the same moment she spotted the herd. Their eyes met across 500 yards of open ground, and she saw her own frustration reflected in his expression. They'd both found the elk at exactly the same time. Now what? The rules of the competition were clear. First to return with proof of a kill won the territory. But they didn't specify what happened if both hunters found the same herd simultaneously. Did it become a race to see who could make a kill first? A competition to see who was the better hunter? Or something else entirely? Damon raised one hand in what might have been a greeting or a challenge. Kira found herself waving back before she thought better of it. For a moment they stood frozen on opposite sides of the valley, two predators eyeing the same prey and each other. Then one of the elk cows raised her head, nostrils flaring as she tested the wind. She caught their scent, both of them. In seconds the entire herd would bolt, and the hunt would be over before it began. Kira made a split-second decision. Instead of trying to spook the elk toward her position or away from Damon's, she pointed toward the valley's eastern exit, where the terrain narrowed into a bottleneck. If they worked together, they could funnel the herd into a confined space where either of them would have a clean shot. Damon hesitated for maybe 2 heartbeats, then nodded. He melted back into the forest, circling toward the western side of the meadow while Kira moved to cover the northern approaches. It was exactly the kind of coordinated hunting strategy they'd used against the bear, but this time they were cooperating by choice rather than necessity. The lead cow finally caught enough of their scent to trigger her alarm instincts. She barked a warning call, and the entire herd lifted their heads in unison. For a moment the meadow was frozen in tableau. 30 elk poised for flight, 2 hidden wolves closing in from opposite directions. Then chaos erupted. The herd scattered like startled birds, but Kira and Damon's positioning forced them toward the eastern bottleneck exactly as planned. A magnificent 6-point bull led the charge, his rack gleaming in the morning sunlight as he bounded across the uneven ground with surprising grace for something so large. Kira burst from cover just as the bull reached the narrow passage between 2 house-sized boulders. Her transformation from human to wolf happened mid-stride, clothes shredding as her body flowed into its predator form. She hit the ground running, black fur and silver eyes focused entirely on her target. But Damon was there too, approaching from the opposite angle in his massive silver-gray wolf form. They converged on the bull at exactly the same moment. Two apex predators with the same goal, and no time to negotiate who had the right of way. The bull saw them coming and tried to change direction, but the rocky terrain left him nowhere to go. He lowered his head and charged, antlers aimed at Kira's smaller form. At the last second she twisted aside, feeling the rush of air as 6 sharp points passed inches from her ribs. Damon used the distraction to his advantage, leaping for the bull's throat while its attention was focused on Kira. His jaws found their mark, locking around the elk's windpipe in the killing grip that would end the hunt. Except the bull wasn't finished fighting. 800 pounds of panicked elk slammed sideways into the narrow passage, trying to shake off the wolf attached to its throat. Damon held on grimly, but the rocky walls provided no room to maneuver. A desperate kick from the bull's rear hooves caught him in the ribs, and his grip faltered. The elk twisted free and bolted for open ground, blood streaming from its torn throat, but still very much alive. In seconds it would disappear into the forest, and both hunters would have failed. Kira didn't think. She launched herself at the fleeing bull's rear legs, her jaws clamping down on the tendon just above the hock. The elk stumbled, momentum carrying it forward but balance destroyed. It went down hard, crashing into the rocky ground with a sound like thunder. Damon was there an instant later, his killing bite finally finding its mark. This time the bull couldn't struggle free, and within minutes its movements stilled. They'd done it, together. But as the adrenaline faded and they shifted back to human form, the implications of what they'd just accomplished began to sink in. They'd cooperated instead of competing, worked as a team instead of rivals, made a kill that belonged to both of them and neither of them. "So," Damon said finally, standing naked and blood-streaked beside their shared prey, "how exactly do we determine a winner?" Kira laughed, the sound slightly hysterical. "I have absolutely no idea." They stared at each other across the elk's still form. Two alphas who'd just broken every rule of territorial competition and discovered they made a devastatingly effective hunting team. The knowledge sat between them like a loaded weapon, dangerous and impossible to ignore. "We could call it a tie," she suggested, "and split the territory. Or," the words stuck in her throat, too revolutionary to speak aloud. "Or," Damon prompted. "Or we could figure out why two rival packs keep ending up as perfect hunting partners," she said in a rush. "Why we fight better together than apart. Why every time we're supposed to be enemies, we end up saving each other's lives instead." The silence stretched between them, heavy with possibility and danger in equal measure. Finally, Damon stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his storm-gray eyes. "That," he said quietly, "sounds like the most dangerous idea either of us has ever had." "Probably." Kira met his gaze steadily. "Are you interested anyway?" For answer, he cupped her face in both hands and kissed her. Chapter 6. The kiss was everything Kira had imagined and nothing like she'd expected. Soft at first, almost questioning, then deeper as she responded by winding her arms around his neck and pressing closer. Damon tasted like coffee and wild honey, like danger and possibility wrapped in one perfect moment that made her wolf purr with satisfaction. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Kira could feel the rapid beat of Damon's heart against her chest, could see the way his pupils had dilated with desire and something that looked suspiciously like vulnerability. "This is insane," she whispered, but made no move to step away. Completely. His thumb traced the line of her lower lip, making her shiver. "We're talking about our pack's future here. Territory that's been in dispute for months. And instead of settling it like civilized alphas, we're making out over a dead elk while covered in blood and completely naked? That's a very succinct summary, yes." Kira laughed despite herself. "We should probably get dressed and figure out what we're actually going to do about this competition." Probably, but neither of them moved. The morning sun was warm on her bare skin, and the forest around them was alive with birdsong and the rustle of small creatures going about their daily business. It felt surreal to be standing here with her greatest rival, sharing something that was supposed to be impossible. "For what it's worth," Damon said quietly, "I think your idea has merit, about figuring out why we work so well together. Even though it could destroy both our packs if we're wrong. Even though." His hands slid down to rest on her shoulders. "I've been thinking about you for months, Kira. Not just as a territorial opponent, but as you. The way you refused to back down during that first border dispute. How you stood up to the neutral pack elders when they tried to dismiss your concerns. The fierce way you protect what's yours. Heat flooded her cheeks. I thought you saw me as a weak alpha playing at leadership. I let you think that because it was easier than admitting I was attracted to someone I was supposed to consider an enemy. Damon's smile was rueful. Easier than acknowledging that every time we faced off, I was fighting the urge to pin you against the nearest tree and find out if you tasted as good as you smelled. The confession sent liquid fire straight through her system. You have terrible timing, you know that? We're standing over our mutual hunting kill, covered in elk blood, in the middle of a territorial competition that's supposed to determine our pack's future. I know. Believe me, I know how complicated this is. His expression grew serious. But complicated doesn't make it wrong, does it? Before she could answer, a sharp whistle echoed across the valley. Both wolves tensed instantly, every sense on high alert. The sound came again, 3 short blasts that meant urgent communication in pack protocol. Signal whistle, Damon said, reaching for his scattered clothes. Someone's looking for us. They dressed quickly, the intimate moment shattered by the intrusion of outside reality. Kira's mind raced as she pulled on her hiking clothes, trying to think of reasons someone would track them into the wilderness during an official competition. Could be neutral pack observers, she said, lacing her boots with sharp, efficient movements. Making sure we're following the rules. Could be. But Damon's tone suggested he thought it was something else entirely. The whistle came a third time, closer now and definitely moving in their direction. Kira shouldered her pack and looked down at the elk they'd killed together. Taking proof of the kill was supposed to end the competition, but which of them had the right to claim victory? We need to decide, she said. Right now. Who's taking credit for this? Damon was quiet for a moment, studying her face. What if neither of us does? What do you mean? What if we tell them the truth? That we found the herd at the same time, worked together to make the kill, and discovered that our packs might be stronger as allies than enemies. The suggestion was so radical it took her breath away. You're talking about a formal alliance. Merged territory, shared resources, joint leadership. I'm talking about exploring possibilities instead of hiding behind old grudges. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to an urgent whisper. Think about it, Kira. Your pack is small but experienced in dealing with human authorities and managing territory. Mine is larger but needs better political connections and administrative skills. Together, we'd be the strongest combined pack in the Pacific Northwest. It was true. The Blackthorn pack's political savvy combined with Silverclaw's raw power would create a formidable alliance. But it would also mean trusting Damon completely, betting everything on a connection that had developed over less than 48 hours. And us, she asked. What happens to whatever this is between us if our packs merge? I don't know. His honesty was both reassuring and terrifying. But I'd like the chance to find out. The whistle sounded again, much closer now. Through the trees, Kira could see movement. At least 3 figures making their way toward the valley. There was no more time for debate. All right, she said, her heart hammering against her ribs. We do this together. But if it goes badly, it won't. Damon's confidence was absolute. Trust me. The first figure to emerge from the forest was Elder Morrison from the neutral Moonhaven pack, followed by 2 younger wolves Kira didn't recognize. The elder's weathered face was grim as he surveyed the scene. 2 alphas standing together beside a fresh elk kill, both looking slightly shell-shocked. Alpha Blackthorn. Alpha Silverclaw. Morrison's greeting was formal but concerned. We've been tracking you since dawn. There's been a development that requires immediate attention. Ice formed in Kira's stomach. What kind of development? Your cousin Marcus has made a formal challenge for alpha leadership of the Silverclaw pack, Morrison said, his words hitting like hammer blows. He's claimed you've abandoned your duties to pursue an improper relationship with a rival alpha. The challenge combat is scheduled for tomorrow at sunset. The blood drained from Kira's face as she looked at Damon. His expression had gone completely still, but she could see the storm gathering behind his eyes. On what grounds? Damon's voice was deadly quiet. Dereliction of duty. Breach of pack loyalty. And Morrison hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. Inappropriate fraternization with an enemy that compromises pack security. Fraternization. Kira's voice came out strangled. They've been watching us. Marcus has had scouts tracking both of you since yesterday morning. one of the younger wolves confirmed. He has detailed reports of your cooperation during the hunt. The trap closed around them with brutal efficiency. Someone had orchestrated this perfectly, forcing them into a situation where their growing connection would be seen as betrayal instead of strength. Marcus hadn't just been challenging Damon's leadership. He'd been building a case for why that leadership was illegitimate. "I have to go back," Damon said, his alpha mask sliding into place. "A formal challenge can't be ignored or delayed." "What about the competition?" "The territorial dispute. Consider it settled in favor of joint custody," Elder Morrison said dryly. "Given the circumstances, the neutral packs are declaring the hunt a draw. Both territories remain under their current leadership until other matters are resolved. Until Damon either defeats his cousin or dies trying," Kira translated mentally. "Because that's what formal challenges meant, combat to the death, with the winner taking control of the pack." "I'm coming with you," she said. "No." Damon's refusal was immediate and absolute. "This is pack business. Silverclaw business. Your presence would only make things worse." "Worse how?" "By proving that we actually care about each other? That this isn't just political maneuvering. By giving Marcus more ammunition for his claims that I've compromised pack security for personal gain." Damon's expression was anguished but determined. "Kira, if you're there tomorrow night, it won't matter whether I win or lose. The pack will always question whether my judgment was clouded by emotion." The logic was sound and absolutely infuriating. "So what? I just sit in my territory and wait to hear whether you're alive or dead. You go home and take care of your people. And you trust that I'm strong enough to handle one arrogant cousin who thinks politics matters more than actual leadership ability." Before she could argue further, Damon pulled her against him and kissed her with desperate intensity. It lasted only seconds, but she felt him pouring everything he couldn't say into the contact: fear, hope, love, and the terrible possibility that this might be goodbye. "Whatever happens," he whispered against her lips, "don't let them convince you this was wrong. What we found, what we could build together, it's worth fighting for." Then he was walking away, following Elder Morrison back into the forest without a single look back. Kira stood frozen beside the elk carcass, watching the man who'd become everything to her disappear into the trees to face a challenge that could end before it truly began. 24 hours, she thought numbly. In 24 hours, either Damon wins and we have a chance, or he dies and this was all for nothing. She'd never felt more powerless in her life. Chapter 7. The Silverclaw compound buzzed with tension when Damon arrived that evening. Word of the formal challenge had spread through the pack like wildfire, and wolves clustered in small groups throughout the central courtyard, their conversations dying as he passed. He could smell their uncertainty, their excitement, their fear. Some were loyal to him personally, others to the pack as an institution. And some, he realized with growing unease, were actively hoping for a change in leadership. Damon, his beta, Thomas Reeves, materialized at his elbow. "We need to talk." Privately. They made their way to Damon's private office in the main lodge, a space that suddenly felt more like a tomb than a seat of power. Thomas closed the door behind them and activated the white noise generator that would prevent eavesdropping. "How bad is it?" Damon asked without preamble. "Bad. Marcus has been building support for months, not weeks. Half the pack council is sympathetic to his position, and the other half is wavering." Thomas's expression was grim. "He's not just challenging your leadership. He's claiming you've been mentally compromised by your obsession with the Blackthorne Alpha." Obsession. The word tasted bitter. Is that what they're calling it? Among other things. Marcus has been very creative in his interpretation of your recent behavior. Thomas pulled out a tablet and scrolled through what looked like surveillance photos. Intimate conversations during pack meetings. Distracted behavior during territory patrols. And now detailed documentation of your cooperation during the hunting competition. Damon studied the images with growing fury. Someone had been watching him for weeks, cataloging every moment of weakness or distraction, building a case that painted his growing feelings for Kira as a fundamental betrayal of pack loyalty. Who took these? We're still investigating, but the betting pool has Rebecca Martinez as the front runner. Thomas's voice was carefully neutral. She's been Marcus's strongest supporter on the council, and she has the tracking skills to pull off this level of surveillance. Rebecca. Damon's jaw clenched as he thought about his head scout, a wolf he'd trusted with sensitive missions and pack security. If she'd been feeding information to Marcus, How long had his cousin been planning this coup? What about pack sentiment? How many are actively supporting the challenge? Maybe a third are firmly in Marcus's camp. Another third are loyal to you personally. The final third are waiting to see which way the wind blows. Thomas sat heavily in the chair across from Damon's desk. It's not good, but it's not hopeless. And if I lose? If you lose, Marcus becomes alpha and immediately declares war on the Blackthorn pack. He's been very clear that his first act as leader will be to eliminate the threat that compromised his predecessor's judgment. Ice formed in Damon's stomach. This wasn't just about leadership succession. It was about Kira's life. Marcus would use any excuse to attack her pack, and a dead rival alpha would conveniently eliminate any questions about Damon's loyalties. Then I don't lose, he said simply. Damon, Marcus is good. Really good. He's younger than you, faster. And he's been training specifically for this fight for months while you've been distracted by territorial disputes and other matters. Are you saying I can't take him? I'm saying don't underestimate him because he's family. He's planning to kill you tomorrow night, and he's prepared to do whatever it takes to make that happen. They spent the next 3 hours going over combat strategies and reviewing Marcus's fighting style from previous pack challenges. But as the night wore on, Damon found his thoughts drifting to a certain black-haired alpha who was probably pacing her territory and driving herself crazy with worry. Don't let them convince you this was wrong, he'd told her. But sitting here in his office, surrounded by evidence of his pack's divided loyalties, he had to wonder if Marcus might have a point. Had his growing feelings for Kira compromised his judgment? Made him weak? There's something else, Thomas said as they finished reviewing tactical options. A message came for you about an hour ago. Private courier, very discreet. He handed over a sealed envelope with Damon's name written in elegant script. No return address, but the paper was expensive and the handwriting was definitely feminine. Inside was a single sheet of cream-colored stationery with just a few lines. If you die tomorrow, I will hunt your cousin to the ends of the earth and make him pay for taking away my chance to see where this leads. Don't you dare make me a widow before I've even been a wife. Come back to me. K. Damon read the note 3 times, warmth spreading through his chest despite everything else happening. Trust Kira to threaten violence and promise devotion in the same breath. She was magnificent and terrifying and absolutely perfect, and he'd be damned if he was going to let Marcus steal away their future. Good news? Thomas asked, noting the change in his expression. The best. Damon folded the note carefully and tucked it into his shirt pocket, close to his heart. Tell the Pack Council to prepare the challenge circle. Tomorrow night, we settle this once and for all. But as he made his final preparations for combat, one thought kept echoing in his mind. Kira had called herself his wife-to-be. Not his ally, not his political partner, but his wife. The idea should have terrified him. Instead, it made him feel invincible. Marcus had no idea what kind of force he was challenging. Chapter 8. The challenge circle had been used for formal pack combat for over 60 years. A ring of ancient stones that marked sacred ground where disputes were settled through blood and dominance. Torches provided flickering illumination as the entire Silverclaw pack gathered to witness their alpha's trial by combat. Damon stood at the circle's center, stripped to the waist and barefoot as tradition demanded. Across from him, Marcus Silverclaw looked every inch the confident challenger. Younger, broader through the shoulders, with the kind of predatory grace that spoke of countless hours spent training for this moment. Any last words before we begin? Marcus called out, his voice carrying easily to the watching crowd. Maybe an apology for putting your personal desires above pack welfare? Just one. Damon's response was quiet but clear. When this is over, you're going to understand exactly why I've been fighting so hard to protect what's mine. The Pack Council had appointed Elder Sarah Brightwater as combat judge, a neutral party whose word would be law during the challenge. She stepped forward with the ceremonial blade that would mark the beginning and end of the fight. This is formal challenge combat as established by Pack law, she announced. The challenger Marcus Silverclaw disputes the leadership of Alpha Damon Silverclaw on grounds of dereliction of duty and compromised judgment. Combat will continue until one participant yields, is incapacitated, or dies. Do both parties understand and accept these terms? I accept, Marcus said immediately. Damon nodded. Accepted. Then let the challenge begin. Marcus shifted first, his human form flowing into that of a massive gray wolf with yellow eyes and bared fangs. He was impressive, larger than most pack members and clearly in peak physical condition. But Damon had been preparing for this fight longer than his cousin realized. He shifted a heartbeat later, his own transformation revealing the silver-gray wolf that had been refined by years of combat and leadership challenges. They circled each other warily, both looking for openings and weaknesses. Marcus attacked first, launching himself at Damon's throat with the kind of direct assault that had served him well in previous challenges. But Damon wasn't most opponents. He twisted aside at the last second, letting Marcus's momentum carry him past, then spun to rake claws across his cousin's exposed flank. First blood to the alpha. Marcus recovered quickly, wheeling to face Damon with new respect and wariness in his eyes. This wasn't going to be the quick victory he'd anticipated. They fought with the vicious intensity of family members who knew each other's strengths and weaknesses intimately. Marcus had youth and raw power on his side, but Damon had experience and the desperate motivation of a wolf fighting for his mate. Because that's what Kira was, he realized as he ducked under another slashing attack. Not just his political ally or territorial partner, but his mate. The recognition of the bond sent strength flooding through his system. Marcus seemed to sense the shift, his attacks becoming more desperate and brutal. He managed to lock his jaws around Damon's front leg, bearing down with bone-crushing force. Pain exploded up Damon's arm, but instead of trying to pull away, he used the grip to his advantage. With Marcus committed to the bite, Damon had a clear shot at his cousin's throat. His own jaws found their mark, and suddenly the challenger was the one fighting for his life. They went down in a tangle of fur and fury, rolling across the ancient stones as each tried to maintain his killing grip. Blood flowed freely from multiple wounds, staining the ground dark in the torchlight. But Marcus was younger, and as the fight wore on, Damon could feel his strength beginning to flag. His cousin sensed it too, redoubling his efforts to break free from the throat hold. "Don't you dare make me a widow before I've even been a wife." Kira's words echoed in his mind like a battle cry. He'd promised to come back to her, promised they'd have the chance to explore what they could build together. He wasn't about to break that promise now. With a surge of desperate strength, Damon tightened his grip and twisted, using every bit of leverage and technique he'd learned in 32 years of surviving as an alpha. Marcus's struggles grew weaker, then still. The challenge circle fell silent except for the sound of Damon's labored breathing. He held the position for several more seconds, making sure his cousin was truly unconscious rather than dead, then released his grip and shifted back to human form. Marcus was alive but badly injured, his wolf form already beginning the healing process that would save his life. He'd recover, but it would take weeks, and his challenge had failed decisively. "The challenge is concluded," Elder Brightwater announced. "Alpha Damon Silverclaw retains pack leadership by right of combat." The crowd erupted in a mixture of cheers and stunned silence. Damon accepted congratulations from his supporters, while trying to assess which pack members looked disappointed by the outcome. Those would be problems for another day. "Alpha." Thomas appeared at his side with medical supplies and clean clothes. "You need to get those wounds tended." "In a minute." Damon's eyes scanned the crowd until he found Rebecca Martinez standing near the back, her expression carefully neutral. "Rebecca." "A word." The head scout approached with obvious reluctance. "Alpha." Those surveillance photos Marcus used to build his case. Very professional work. Almost like they were taken by someone with advanced tracking and reconnaissance skills. Rebecca's face went pale, but she held his gaze steadily. "I don't know what you're implying." "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating a fact." Damon's voice carried easily to the surrounding wolves. "You've been feeding information to Marcus for months, documenting my activities and building a case for his challenge. The only question is whether you were motivated by genuine concern for pack welfare or personal ambition." Rebecca started, then stopped as she realized the entire pack was listening. "I believe the pack needed new leadership. You've been distracted, making decisions based on emotion rather than logic. And you thought Marcus would be better? I thought Marcus would put pack interests first instead of chasing after some territorial rival like a lovesick adolescent." The insult hung in the air like a challenge. Several pack members growled their disapproval, but Damon held up a hand for silence. "Rebecca Martinez, you are hereby expelled from Silverclaw territory for treachery against your alpha and disloyalty to your pack." You have 24 hours to gather your belongings and leave. If you're found on Silverclaw land after that time, you'll be considered a hostile intruder. Rebecca's face crumpled, but she didn't argue. Exile was better than the death sentence she could have faced for her betrayal. As the crowd began to disperse, Damon finally allowed Thomas to tend his wounds. But his mind was already racing ahead to the next challenge, convincing his pack that their future lay in alliance with their former enemies. Because now that he'd secured his position as alpha, he had every intention of claiming his mate. The only question was whether Kira was ready for what that meant. Chapter 9. Kira was pacing the length of her temporary office for the 100th time when the phone rang. She lunged for it, heart hammering against her ribs as she recognized the number. "Thomas," she answered breathlessly. "It's over." Thomas Reeves' voice was rough with exhaustion, but tinged with relief. "Damon won. Marcus is alive but defeated. The challenge has been settled." She sank into her chair, legs suddenly too weak to support her. "How badly is he hurt?" "Banged up, but nothing that won't heal. He's asking for you." The simple words sent heat flooding through her system. After 24 hours of imagining the worst possible outcomes, the knowledge that Damon was alive and wanted to see her was almost overwhelming. "I'm on my way," she said, already reaching for her keys. "Kira, wait." Thomas's tone made her pause. "There are complications. The pack is divided about what happened tonight. Some see Damon's victory as proof of his strength. Others think Marcus was right about compromised judgment. Your presence here could inflame tensions. I don't care about pack politics right now. You should, because what happens next affects both your territories." Thomas was quiet for a moment. Damon defeated the immediate challenge to his leadership, but the underlying issues haven't been resolved. If you two are serious about exploring this alliance, you need to do it smart. Politically smart. The reminder that their personal feelings existed within a larger framework of pack dynamics was sobering. "What are you suggesting?" "Formal courtship. Traditional protocols that show respect for both packs while allowing you to determine compatibility." Thomas's voice warmed slightly. "It's old-fashioned, but it gives political cover for what's already happening between you." Formal courtship. The concept was antiquated by modern standards, a relic from an era when pack alliances were sealed through mating bonds and territorial marriages. But it would provide exactly the kind of political legitimacy their relationship needed. How long does formal courtship typically last? 3 months minimum. Long enough to demonstrate serious intent and allow both packs to adjust to the idea. Thomas paused. "Kira, there's something else. Something you need to know before you make any decisions." Ice formed in her stomach. "What?" "The bond between you and Damon. It's not just attraction or political convenience." Thomas's words were careful, measured. Every wolf in the challenge circle could smell it tonight. The mate bond. It's already begun forming. The mate bond. Kira had heard stories about the mystical connection that sometimes developed between wolves destined to be together, but she'd always dismissed them as romantic nonsense. The idea that she and Damon might be experiencing something that fundamental, that permanent, was both thrilling and terrifying. "Are you certain?" "Certain enough that half the pack is already referring to you as their future alpha female." Thomas's chuckle was rueful. "Whether you wanted it or not, this relationship has moved beyond casual exploration. The question is what you're going to do about it." Kira closed her eyes, trying to process the implications. A mate bond couldn't be broken once fully formed. It was a connection that transcended pack politics or territorial disputes, linking two wolves on levels both physical and spiritual. If she and Damon were truly bonding, there was no going back. "I need to see him," she said finally. "I thought you might. He's in his private quarters, trying to pretend his injuries don't hurt while he waits for you to call." Thomas's voice softened. "Kira, for what it's worth, I've never seen him like this before. Whatever's happening between you two, it's real." 20 minutes later, she was standing outside the Silverclaw compound's main lodge, suddenly uncertain about walking into territory that no longer felt quite so foreign. The guards nodded respectfully as she passed, their sense carrying acceptance rather than hostility. Damon's quarters were on the 3rd floor, a suite of rooms that balanced comfort with the kind of security an alpha required. She knocked softly, then entered when his voice called for her to come in. He was sitting on the edge of his bed, wearing nothing but loose sweatpants and an impressive collection of bandages. Claw marks raked across his chest and arms, already healing but still angry-looking in the lamplight. When he looked up and saw her, his entire expression transformed. Kira. Her name was a prayer on his lips. She crossed the room in 3 quick strides and kissed him with all the fear and relief and desperate love she'd been holding back for 24 hours. He responded with equal fervor, his arms coming around her despite the obvious pain the movement caused. "You're hurt," she whispered against his lips. "I'm alive. That's what matters." His hands framed her face, thumbs stroking along her cheekbones. "I kept my promise. I came back to you. Barely. Thomas said it was close. Not that close. I had excellent motivation to win." Damon's smile was soft and intimate. "Someone threatened to hunt my cousin to the ends of the earth if I died. I couldn't let that happen." Despite everything, Kira laughed. That someone might have been experiencing some intense emotions when she wrote that note. Good. Because that someone is about to experience some more intense emotions. Damon's expression grew serious. "Thomas told you about the mate bond? He mentioned it. Is it true? What do you think?" Damon guided her hand to rest over his heart, where she could feel the steady rhythm that seemed to match her own pulse. "Every time you're near, my wolf recognizes something it's been searching for. Every time you're away, I feel incomplete." The admission sent warmth flooding through her system. "I thought I was going crazy. The way I can't stop thinking about you, the way my body responds when you're close. That's the bond forming. It'll only get stronger as time goes on." His thumb traced the line of her jaw. "The question is whether you're ready for what that means." "What does it mean?" "It means we're mated for life, Kira. No divorce, no separation, no changing our minds if the politics get complicated." Damon's storm-gray eyes searched her face. "It means choosing each other over everything else, including our individual packs if necessary." The magnitude of what he was describing should have sent her running. Instead, she found herself leaning closer, drawn by the certainty in his voice and the answering certainty in her own heart. "And if I said yes? If I said I wanted that? Then we do this right. Formal courtship, pact negotiations, all the traditional protocols that turn a personal relationship into a political alliance." His hands slid down to rest on her shoulders. 3 months to let both packs adjust to the idea, then a mating ceremony that makes everything official. 3 months. The timeline seemed both impossibly long and terrifyingly short. What happens during formal courtship? We spend time together. Supervised visits, joint pack activities, opportunities for both our people to see us as a unit. Damon's smile turned wicked. Also, according to tradition, no intimate physical contact until the mating ceremony. Kira's eyebrows shot up. No physical contact? For 3 months. Well, nothing beyond kissing. The idea is to prove that the relationship is based on emotional and intellectual compatibility rather than just physical attraction. That's, she paused, trying to find the right word. Archaic. Completely. But it's also politically brilliant. No one can claim we rushed into anything or let lust cloud our judgment. Damon leaned forward to brush his lips against hers, light and teasing. Besides, anticipation can be its own kind of pleasure. Heat coiled low in her belly at the promise in his voice. 3 months of building tension, of stolen glances and carefully controlled desire, of knowing exactly where they were heading while being forced to take their time getting there. "You realize this means I'll have to move part of my pack here? For the supervised visits and joint activities. Actually, I was thinking we could split time between territories. Your compound will be rebuilt by then, and it would show both packs that we're equals in this partnership." The thoughtfulness behind the suggestion made her chest tight with emotion. Equal partners, not conqueror and conquered. Joint leaders building something new rather than one pack absorbing the other. "All right," she said, her decision crystallizing like ice forming on still water. Formal courtship it is. 3 months of political maneuvering and carefully supervised romance. And then we find out what happens when 2 stubborn alphas try to build a life together. She kissed him again, slower this time, savoring the taste and feel of him. "Fair warning, I have very strong opinions about pack management and I don't compromise easily." "Good. I'd be disappointed if you were easy to handle." Damon's laugh was rich and warm. "This is going to be interesting. That's one word for it." Kira settled beside him on the bed, careful not to jostle his injuries. "So what's the first step in this formal courtship process?" "Tomorrow we meet with both pack councils to announce our intentions and negotiate the terms. Then we spend the next 3 months driving each other crazy with unresolved sexual tension, while we plan the most politically significant mating ceremony in Pacific Northwest pack history. You make it sound so romantic. Oh, it will be romantic. Eventually. His arm came around her, pulling her close despite the pain it obviously caused. But first we have to survive the politics. And trust me, that's going to be the real challenge. As if summoned by his words, a knock on the door interrupted their moment of peace. Thomas's voice carried through the wood, tinged with urgency. Damon, we have a problem. The Seattle Pack Council is demanding an emergency session about your challenge victory. They're claiming irregularities in the combat and questioning your right to retain leadership. Kira felt Damon's body tense against hers. And so it begins, he murmured. The real fight starts now. But as they rose to face whatever political maneuvering awaited them, Kira found herself smiling. Because for the first time since this whole mess began, she and Damon were facing the challenges together. As partners, as equals, as mates. The rest was just details. Chapter 10. The emergency session of the Seattle Pack Council was held in the neutral territory of Discovery Park, a sprawling urban wilderness that had been designated supernatural sanctuary since the 1960s. Representatives from 8 different packs gathered in the old ceremonial lodge, their faces grim in the flickering candlelight. Kira sat beside Damon at the respondents' table, hyper-aware of every glance and whispered comment from the assembled wolves. Word of their formal courtship had spread through the supernatural community like wildfire, bringing with it a mixture of curiosity, skepticism, and outright hostility. This emergency session is called to order, announced Elena Vasquez, the council's rotating chair. Despite her human heritage, she commanded respect from every pack in the region. We're here to address concerns raised about the recent leadership challenge in Silverclaw territory and its potential impact on regional stability. Councilman James Morrison from the East Side Pack leaned forward. Let's cut to the chase. Is it true that Alpha Silverclaw's judgment has been compromised by an inappropriate relationship with a rival pack leader? I'd hardly call formal courtship inappropriate, Damon replied smoothly. The protocols we're following have been used for territorial alliances for over 2 centuries. Territorial alliances, yes, but not between packs that have been in active dispute for the past year. Morrison's tone was accusatory. Some would say this sudden romance is conveniently timed to avoid resolving legitimate territorial conflicts. Heat flashed through Kira's system, but she kept her voice level. Councilman Morrison, are you suggesting that Alpha Silverclaw and I fabricated our relationship for political gain? I'm suggesting that the timing raises questions about motives. Morrison pulled out a tablet and began reading. 6 months of escalating border disputes. 3 formal complaints filed with neutral arbitrators. A hunting competition that conveniently ended in a draw when both participants discovered mutual attraction. The hunting competition ended in a draw because we chose cooperation over conflict, Kira said firmly. Because we realized our packs would be stronger as allies than enemies. How convenient. The voice came from the back of the room, where Marcus Silverclaw sat with his arm in a sling and his face still bearing the marks of his failed challenge. My cousin discovers love just in time to avoid making hard decisions about territorial expansion. Damon's control didn't slip, but Kira caught the dangerous shift in his scent. Marcus, you're here as an observer, not a participant. I suggest you remember that. I'm here as a concerned pack member who wants answers. Marcus stood slowly, favoring his injured ribs. The Silverclaw pack has been stagnant for years while our neighbors expanded their territories and increased their influence. Now, instead of addressing those issues, our alpha chooses to pursue a romantic entanglement that conveniently eliminates our strongest rival. Eliminated how? Elena asked sharply. Both packs retain their current territories and leadership structures. For now. But what happens when they're mated? When pack resources are shared and territorial boundaries become meaningless? Marcus's voice carried to every corner of the lodge. We'll have created a super pack that controls nearly 1/3 of the region's territory. That's a threat to every other pack here. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembled representatives. Kira realized with growing unease that Marcus had identified a legitimate concern. A merged Blackthorne Silverclaw alliance would indeed be the largest pack in the Pacific Northwest, with the political and economic power that implied. The formal courtship agreement includes provisions for maintaining separate pack identities, Damon said. Joint leadership doesn't mean absorption or conquest. Joint leadership is just a pretty name for territorial merger, Councilwoman Sarah Brightwater interjected. And territorial mergers require council approval under the regional accords. The trap closed with elegant precision. Kira felt her stomach drop as she realized what they were facing. The council could block their courtship by refusing to approve the implied territorial alliance. Without political legitimacy, their relationship would be seen as a rogue action that threatened regional stability. Councilwoman Brightwater, she said carefully, are you suggesting that the council has authority over personal relationships between consenting adults? I'm suggesting that when those personal relationships have territorial implications, they become council business. Brightwater's expression was sympathetic but firm. The regional accords are clear about preventing any single pack from accumulating too much power. Elena raised her hand for silence as arguments began breaking out around the room. Let me ask the obvious question. What exactly are you proposing, Alphas Blackthorne and Silverclaw? Kira looked at Damon, seeing her own uncertainty reflected in his eyes. They'd planned for political opposition to their courtship, but not for accusations of territorial overreach. We're proposing exactly what we've stated, Damon said finally. Formal courtship leading to a mating bond, with provisions for joint leadership that maintains both packs' autonomy and existing territorial boundaries. And if the council determines that such an arrangement threatens regional stability? The question hung in the air like a death sentence, because they all knew what Elena was really asking. What would happen if the council ordered them to choose between their relationship and their pack leadership? Then we would respectfully request mediation to address any specific concerns, Kira replied, buying time while her mind raced through alternatives. Mediation. Marcus's laugh was bitter. How diplomatic. But what happens when mediation fails? When the council determines that this alliance poses an unacceptable risk to regional balance? Before either of them could answer, a new voice cut through the tension. Perhaps that determination is premature. Every head turned toward the lodge entrance, where a figure stood silhouetted against the evening light. As he stepped into the candlelit interior, Kira's breath caught in recognition. Alexander Kane, alpha of the Portland Pack, and the most powerful werewolf in the Pacific Northwest. His presence at a council session usually meant crisis-level politics were at play. Alexander. Elena's greeting was carefully neutral. This is unexpected. Is it? When the two most promising young alphas in the region face political persecution for attempting an innovative solution to territorial disputes. Kane's pale blue eyes swept the room with predatory intensity. I think my interest is entirely appropriate. He moved to stand behind Kira and Damon's table, a position that clearly indicated support. The political implications sent shock waves through the assembled representatives. You're endorsing their alliance? Morrison asked, disbelief clear in his voice. I'm endorsing creative problem-solving over the same tired territorial disputes that have plagued this region for decades. Kane's smile was sharp and dangerous. The Blackthorne and Silverclaw packs have been fighting over the same territory for over a year. Now they've found a solution that eliminates conflict while maintaining both packs' autonomy. That's exactly the kind of innovative thinking we need more of. It's also the kind of territorial consolidation that threatens smaller packs, Brightwater countered. Only if you assume consolidation is the goal. But what if it's not? Kane gestured toward Kira and Damon. What if they're pioneering a new model for pack cooperation? Shared resources without territorial absorption. Joint leadership without loss of individual identity. The concept was revolutionary enough to give the assembled representatives pause. Pack politics had operated on zero-sum assumptions for generations. Territory gained meant territory lost. Strength accumulated meant weakness elsewhere. The idea that cooperation could increase overall pack strength without threatening regional balance was almost heretical. You're talking about rewriting the fundamental assumptions of pack politics, Elena said slowly. I'm talking about evolution instead of stagnation. Kane's voice carried the authority of someone who'd been building political consensus for longer than most of the other alphas had been alive. The world is changing around us. Human technology makes traditional territorial disputes increasingly visible and dangerous. We need new models for cooperation, or we'll all fall victim to human discovery and suppression. The argument was compelling, but Kira could see skepticism remaining on several faces. Marcus, in particular, looked like he was preparing to voice fresh objections. What exactly are you proposing, Alexander? Elena asked. A pilot program. Allow the Blackthorne Silverclaw alliance to proceed under council observation. Monitor the results for 2 years, then evaluate whether this model of cooperative leadership could be expanded to other territorial disputes. And if the experiment fails? Kane's smile was cold and predatory. Then the council reserves the right to dissolve the alliance and impose traditional territorial boundaries, with appropriate consequences for the participants. Appropriate consequences. The euphemism sent ice through Kira's veins. In pack law, that usually meant exile, imprisonment, or death. Those are significant stakes, Damon said quietly. They are, but they're also proportional to the potential benefits. Kane's pale eyes fixed on them with laser intensity. The question is whether you're confident enough in your alliance to accept the risk. Kira felt the weight of every gaze in the room. This was the moment of truth. Accept Kane's proposal and bet everything on their ability to make the alliance work, or walk away and return to the cycle of territorial disputes that had defined their relationship. She looked at Damon and saw her own determination reflected in his storm-gray eyes. Whatever came next, they would face it together. "We accept," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the lodge. 2 years under council observation, with full accountability for the success or failure of the alliance. "Seconded," Damon added firmly. Elena looked around the room, gauging reactions. All in favor of accepting the Portland Pact's proposal? The vote was closer than Kira had hoped. 5 in favor, 3 opposed, with 2 abstentions. But it was enough. The motion carries. The Blackthorne Silverclaw alliance will proceed under council oversight, with formal evaluations scheduled for 24 months from today. As the session adjourned and representatives began filing out, Kane approached their table with something that might have been approval in his expression. "Congratulations," he said quietly. "You've just committed to the most scrutinized courtship in Pack history. I hope you're both ready for the level of attention that's going to bring." "Why?" Kira asked. "Why support us when it would have been easier to let the council block the alliance?" Kane's smile was enigmatic. "Because I believe in evolution, Alpha Blackthorne. And because I have a feeling you two are going to prove that cooperation is stronger than competition." He walked away without another word, leaving Kira and Damon alone with the weight of their new responsibilities. 2 years, Damon said finally. 2 years to prove that love is stronger than politics. Kira reached for his hand, intertwining their fingers. "Think we can manage it? With you as a partner? I think we can manage anything." As they left the lodge together, stepping out into the evening air, Kira felt the mate bond pulse between them like a heartbeat. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as a team. The real adventure was just beginning. Chapter 11. 3 months later. The clearing chosen for the mating ceremony was the same one where Kira and Damon had first fought over territorial boundaries, a fact that wasn't lost on anyone in attendance. Ancient pines surrounded the space like silent witnesses, their branches heavy with snow that caught the light of the full moon above. Kira stood at the edge of the trees, wearing the traditional white leather dress that marked her as an unmated female alpha. In less than an hour, she would exchange it for the silver and black colors that represented her union with Damon. The symbolism was powerful. 2 rivals becoming partners, 2 packs becoming one family. "Nervous?" Sarah asked, adjusting the intricate braided crown that held Kira's dark hair. "Terrified," Kira admitted. "What if we're wrong? What if the council was right about this being too much too fast? Then you'll figure it out together, the same way you figured out everything else." Sarah's smile was warm and reassuring. "I've watched you two over the past 3 months. The way you balance each other, the way you make each other stronger. This isn't politics, Kira. This is real." The formal courtship period had been exactly as challenging as Damon had predicted. Supervised visits, joint pack meetings, endless negotiations about resource sharing and territorial management. But beneath the political maneuvering, something deeper had been growing. The mate bond had strengthened with every stolen glance, every carefully controlled touch, every moment of perfect understanding that passed between them. 5 minutes. Thomas called from the clearing center, where he was performing the traditional role of ceremony coordinator. Kira took a deep breath and stepped into the moonlight. The clearing was filled with representatives from both packs, neutral observers from the council, and even a few unexpected guests. Alexander Kane stood near the ceremonial fire, his presence a reminder of the political weight their union carried. But all of that faded when she saw Damon waiting for her at the center of the circle. He wore traditional alpha regalia, leather pants and vest dyed in Silverclaw colors, with ceremonial markings that told the story of his lineage and leadership. But it was the expression on his face that stole her breath away. Love, desire, and absolute certainty blazed in his storm-gray eyes as he watched her approach. "You look beautiful," he said quietly as she took her place beside him. "You clean up pretty well yourself." She had to resist the urge to reach for him, acutely aware of the dozens of eyes watching their every move. Elder Morrison stepped forward to begin the ceremony, his weathered voice carrying easily through the winter air. "We gather tonight under the mating moon to witness the union of 2 alphas, 2 packs, and 2 hearts. This is not just a personal commitment, but a political alliance that will shape the future of our region." The traditional words washed over Kira like familiar music, but her attention was fixed on Damon. 3 months of careful courtship had only intensified the connection between them. Every accidental touch had been electric, every kiss goodnight a promise of what was to come. "Alpha Blackthorne," Morrison continued, "do you come to this union freely, understanding the bonds it will create and the responsibilities it will bring?" "I do," Kira replied, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. "Alpha Silverclaw, do you accept this union as binding, permanent, and sacred under pack law?" "I do," Damon said, his gaze never leaving her face. "Then let the binding begin." Morrison produced the ceremonial blade that would seal their union, the same silver knife that had been used for pack ceremonies for over a century. The mating bond required blood, shared willingly between partners who chose to become one. Damon extended his hand first, not even flinching as the blade opened a shallow cut across his palm. Blood welled up, dark and rich in the moonlight. Kira followed suit, wincing slightly at the sharp sting, but feeling anticipation build as their life forces prepared to mingle. "Join hands," Morrison instructed. The moment their wounded palms touched, the world exploded into sensation. The mate bond, already strong from months of growing connection, snapped into place with the force of lightning. Kira gasped as she felt Damon's emotions flood through their link. Love, desire, fierce protectiveness, and underneath it all, a contentment so deep it brought tears to her eyes. "By blood and bond, under moon and stars, I bind you as mates for life," Morrison announced. "What the pack has witnessed, let no force divide." The assembled wolves erupted in howls of approval, but Kira barely heard them. She was lost in the intensity of the connection now flowing between her and Damon, a link that went beyond physical sensation to something fundamental and unbreakable. "Hello, mate," Damon whispered, his thumb stroking across her knuckles. "Hello yourself." She wanted to kiss him, wanted to drag him away from the crowd and explore every implication of the bond now thrumming between them. But ceremony demanded patience. "The mated pair will now demonstrate their unity," Morrison continued, gesturing toward the large elk that had been prepared for the traditional hunt. This was the part of the ceremony Kira had been dreading. As newly mated alphas, she and Damon were expected to work together to bring down prey, proving their ability to function as a team. It was symbolic rather than practical, but failure in front of both packs would be politically devastating. They shifted simultaneously, their wolves emerging in perfect synchronization. Kira's black fur gleamed in the moonlight while Damon's silver-gray coat seemed to absorb and reflect the fire's glow. Together they approached the elk, which had been released into the clearing for this purpose. The hunt was almost anticlimactic after everything they'd been through. Months of working together had created an instinctive understanding of each other's movements and strategies. They brought down the elk quickly and cleanly, their coordination flawless. As they shifted back to human form and accepted the traditional ceremonial robes, Kira felt a bone-deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with the successful hunt. This was right. She and Damon were right together. "I present to you Alpha Pair Blackthorne Silverclaw," Morrison announced. "May their union bring strength to both packs and peace to the region." The celebration that followed was a blur of congratulations, toasts, and political conversations disguised as social pleasantries. But throughout it all, Kira was aware of the bond humming between her and Damon, a constant reminder that she was no longer alone. "Regrets?" he asked during a quiet moment between well-wishers. "Only that it took us so long to get here." She accepted a glass of champagne from a passing server, noting how natural it felt to stand beside him, their bodies unconsciously moving in harmony. "Though I suppose we needed the time to figure out we weren't actually enemies." "We were never enemies. We were just too stubborn to admit we were meant to be partners. Partners in everything, she agreed, echoing the words she'd spoken months earlier in a cabin during a storm. Speaking of partnerships, Damon said, nodding toward Alexander Kane as he approached their position. I think our political patron wants to offer congratulations. Kane's pale blue eyes were unreadable as he joined them. A beautiful ceremony. Very traditional, very proper. Exactly what the council needed to see. Thank you for your support, Kira said. Without your intervention, we might not have made it this far. Don't thank me yet. The real test starts now. Kane's expression grew serious. The pilot program means every decision you make, every conflict you resolve, every success or failure will be scrutinized by the council. You're not just building a life together. You're proving a concept. The reminder of their political responsibilities should have dampened the mood. But Kira found herself smiling instead. Bring it on. We've handled everything else that's been thrown at us. That's exactly the attitude you'll need. Kane raised his glass in a toast. To the future alpha pair, and to the new model of pack cooperation they represent. May you prove that love is indeed stronger than politics. As the older alpha moved away, Damon pulled Kira closer, his arms settling around her waist with possessive satisfaction. Ready to go home, Mrs. Silverclaw? The new name sent a thrill through her system. Actually, I think it's Mrs. Blackthorne Silverclaw. We did agree on joint leadership, remember? We agreed on a lot of things. But we haven't tested any of them yet. His voice dropped to a husky whisper that made her pulse race. I'm very much looking forward to the testing phase. Heat coiled low in her belly as the implications of his words sank in. 3 months of careful courtship, of stolen kisses and controlled desire, were finally over. Tonight they would belong to each other completely, in every way that mattered. Then what are we waiting for? She asked, already moving toward the edge of the clearing. They made their excuses to the lingering celebration and slipped away into the forest, following the moonlit path that led back to the Silverclaw compound. Their home now shared and equal. Last chance to change your mind, Damon said as they reached the lodge's front steps. Not happening. Kira pulled him down for a kiss that was hungry and demanding and full of 3 months' worth of pent-up passion. You're stuck with me now, Silverclaw. For better or worse. I'm counting on it, he growled against her lips. For everything. As they climbed the stairs together, the mate bond sang between them like music, weaving their hearts and souls together with threads that could never be broken. Whatever challenges lay ahead, and there would be many, they would face them as partners, as equals, as mates. The war between their packs was over. The love story was just beginning. Chapter 12. 2 years later. Kira stood on the observation deck of the newly constructed Blackthorne Silverclaw compound, watching the morning training session with satisfaction that ran bone deep. Below her, wolves from both original packs moved through combat drills with the fluid coordination of a single unit. Sarah barked orders to a mixed group of fighters while Jake demonstrated grappling techniques that combined Blackthorne precision with Silverclaw power. Admiring your handiwork? Damon's voice was warm with amusement as he joined her at the railing, extending a steaming mug of coffee. Our handiwork, she corrected, accepting the drink gratefully. Though I have to admit, there were moments I didn't think we'd make it this far. Pessimist. I never doubted we'd succeed. His arm came around her waist, pulling her against his side with the casual intimacy of 2 years of marriage. Well, maybe during the first winter when Jake and Sarah got into that territory-marking dispute. Kira laughed, remembering the incident that had nearly torn their newly merged pack apart. Or when your cousin Marcus tried to convince the Seattle Council that our resource sharing was actually a hostile takeover in disguise. Marcus has always been dramatic. Speaking of which, how did his exile appeal go? Denied. Again. Apparently, the council doesn't consider my cousin stole my birthright through seduction to be valid grounds for reinstatement. Kira sipped her coffee, savoring both the taste and the quiet morning moment with her mate. Alexander thinks he'll eventually give up and join the Vancouver pack. Alexander Kane thinks a lot of things, most of them accurate. Damon's expression grew thoughtful. Speaking of our political patron, have you seen this morning's council report? He handed her a tablet displaying the official evaluation document they'd both been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. 2 years of marriage, 2 years of joint leadership, 2 years of proving that cooperation could be stronger than competition. Today, the the Seattle Pack Council would render its final judgment on their experimental alliance. Overall pack strength increased by 37%, Kira read aloud. Territorial disputes reduced to 0. Resource efficiency improved by 22%. Integration challenges resolved without external intervention. She looked up at Damon with growing excitement. These numbers are incredible. Keep reading. The best part is at the bottom. She scrolled down to the Council's formal recommendation. The Blackthorne Silverclaw Alliance represents a successful model for pack cooperation that should be considered for broader regional implementation. The alpha pair has demonstrated that joint leadership can strengthen rather than threaten pack autonomy. The pilot program is hereby deemed a complete success. We did it, Kira breathed. We actually proved them wrong. We proved them right about what matters. That innovation is better than stagnation. That cooperation builds strength instead of dividing it. Damon's pride was warm and fierce through their mate bond. That love really can be stronger than politics. A commotion from the training yard drew their attention back to the scene below. But instead of the combat drills they'd been watching, the assembled wolves were now clustered around someone who'd just arrived. Kira recognized the visitor immediately. Elena Vasquez from the Council's administrative staff. Think she's here about the evaluation? Damon asked. Only one way to find out. Kira headed for the stairs, Damon close behind. They reached the courtyard just as Elena finished speaking with Thomas, who immediately approached them with an expression of barely contained excitement. The Council wants to meet with you both this afternoon, he said without preamble. Something about a special commendation and a new assignment. New assignment? Kira exchanged glances with Damon. What kind of assignment? The kind that involves training other packs in alliance integration techniques, Elena said, approaching with a smile that transformed her usually serious face. Congratulations, Alpha Pair. Your experiment has been so successful that the Council wants you to help replicate it across the region. The implications hit Kira like a physical blow. They want us to become mediators for other territorial disputes. More than that, they want you to develop a formal program for pack alliance integration. Structured protocols, training curricula, conflict resolution frameworks. Elena's enthusiasm was infectious. You've created something revolutionary, and now they want you to teach others how to achieve the same results. Damon was quiet for a long moment, processing the offer. That would mean traveling extensively, being away from our territory for weeks at a time. It would also mean ensuring that other packs don't have to go through the political battles we faced, Kira pointed out. We could spare them the suspicion, the accusations, the near disasters. You could spare them a lot of things. But the decision is entirely yours. Elena handed them a formal invitation bearing the Council's official seal. The first assignment would be mediating a territorial dispute between the Portland coastal packs. Similar circumstances to your original situation. 2 alphas who've been fighting over the same territory for months. Sounds familiar, Damon said dryly. Very familiar. Which is why the Council thinks you're uniquely qualified to help them find a better solution. Elena's smile turned mischievous. Who knows? Maybe they'll discover what you did. That the best way to resolve a conflict is to fall in love with your enemy. After Elena left, Kira and Damon walked the perimeter of their shared territory, discussing the offer and its implications. The land that had once been divided by bitter disputes now supported a thriving community of 63 wolves, their children playing together without regard for which pack their parents had originally belonged to. What do you think? Damon asked as they paused beside the creek where they'd once cleaned bear wounds and argued about hunting protocols. I think we've built something amazing here. Something worth protecting and preserving. Kira watched a pair of young wolves practicing combat forms under Sarah's watchful eye. But I also think maybe it's time to help others build the same thing. Even if it means leaving home regularly, missing pack meetings and ceremonial hunts. We'd be leaving together, working together, building something bigger than just our own territory. She turned to face him fully, seeing her own excitement reflected in his storm-gray eyes. Besides, Thomas is more than capable of handling day-to-day operations. And Sarah's been itching for more leadership responsibility. True, and the coastal packs have been feuding for longer than we were. If anyone needs intervention. Damon trailed off, his expression growing thoughtful. You realize this means we'd essentially be professional matchmakers? Helping enemy alphas discover they're actually soulmates. Not all territorial disputes will end in romance, Kira protested, though she was grinning. Some might just end in mutual respect and resource-sharing agreements. Boring. Where's the fun in that? She laughed and pulled him down for a kiss that tasted like coffee and possibility. I love you, you impossible romantic. I love you too, my fierce little alpha. Even when you're trying to be practical about matters of the heart. They made their decision that evening, accepting the council's offer over dinner with their senior staff. The reactions were mixed, excitement from some, concern from others, but universal support for whatever path they chose to take. Just promise me you'll be careful, Sarah said as they reviewed the Portland assignment details. Mediating between hostile alphas can be dangerous, especially if they're not as receptive to alternative solutions as you two were. We'll be fine, Kira assured her. Besides, the worst that can happen is they refuse our help and go back to fighting over territory. We've survived worse odds. Have we, though? Thomas looked up from the logistical reports he'd been reviewing. Because this feels like the beginning of something much bigger than pack mediation. If you're successful with these assignments, the council might start expanding your mandate. Regional coordination, interpack legislation, maybe even continental alliance building. The scope of what he was describing was staggering. You think they're grooming us for regional leadership? I think they're grooming you for whatever comes next in pack evolution. And I think you're both exactly the right wolves for the job. Thomas's smile was proud and slightly worried. Just don't forget where you came from when you're running the Pacific Northwest Territory. 3 months later, Kira stood in another neutral territory clearing, watching another pair of hostile alphas circle each other with familiar animosity. The Cascade Coast Pack and the Redwood Territory Wolves had been fighting over fishing rights and lumber access for 8 months, their dispute escalating from verbal arguments to physical confrontations that had left 3 wolves hospitalized. This is hopeless, muttered Alpha Rebecca Frost of the Cascade Coast Pack. Redwood wolves are too stubborn to negotiate in good faith. Redwood wolves. Alpha Maria Santos stepped forward aggressively. You're the ones who've been poaching our salmon runs and cutting timber in protected groves. Kira exchanged a knowing look with Damon. The hostility, the accusations, the complete unwillingness to see the other perspective. It was like watching their own early interactions played out by different actors. Ladies, Damon said smoothly, stepping between them before the argument could escalate to physical violence. Perhaps we could start with mapping out the specific areas in dispute? Visual aids often help clarify territorial boundaries. What's the point? Rebecca's frustration was evident. She's not going to agree to anything reasonable. And she's not going to stop making unreasonable demands, Maria shot back. Funny, Kira said conversationally. That's exactly what Alpha Silverclaw and I used to say about each other. Right up until we realized we were fighting over the wrong things. Both alphas turned to stare at her. What do you mean? Rebecca asked. I mean you're both focused on what you can't have instead of what you could build together. Kira gestured toward the disputed territory map spread across the neutral meeting table. Your fishing grounds and timber resources are complementary, not competitive. Coast Pack has boats and processing facilities. Redwood Pack has forest management expertise and inland distribution networks. So, Maria's tone was skeptical. So instead of fighting over who gets what, maybe you should be figuring out how to share everything. Damon moved to stand beside the map, his finger tracing the boundary lines that had caused so much conflict. Joint fishing expeditions that use Coast Pack boats and Redwood Pack processing knowledge. Sustainable logging operations that combine Maria's forest expertise with Rebecca's transportation infrastructure. You're talking about an alliance, Rebecca said slowly. We're talking about cooperation instead of competition, Kira corrected. About building something stronger together than either of you could manage alone. The mediation took 3 days of intensive negotiations, but by the end, both packs had agreed to a trial cooperation period that would test the viability of shared resource management. More importantly, Rebecca and Maria were speaking to each other with respect instead of hostility. Think it'll work? Damon asked as they watched the 2 alphas shake hands over their preliminary agreement. Time will tell. But look at them. They're actually listening to each other now instead of just waiting for their turn to argue. Kira felt a familiar satisfaction at seeing former enemies find common ground. That's progress. And if they end up falling for each other the way we did, then we'll have to start charging extra for matchmaking services. Damon's laugh was rich and warm as he pulled her against his side. I can think of worse ways to make a living than helping people discover they're meant to be together. As they prepared to leave the coastal territory and return home, Kira reflected on how far they'd all come. 2 years ago, she and Damon had been bitter rivals fighting over creek boundaries and hunting rights. Now they were building a new model for pack cooperation that was spreading across the region. "No regrets?" Damon asked as they loaded their gear into the truck. "Only that it took us so long to figure out we were on the same side." Kira rose on her toes to kiss him, soft and sure despite the public setting. "Though I suppose we needed the time to grow into the wolves we were meant to be." "Partners in everything," he murmured against her lips. "Partners in everything," she agreed. As they drove home through the forest that had witnessed their first meeting, their first fight, their first kiss, and their mating ceremony, Kira felt the deep contentment that came from building something lasting and meaningful. The mate bond hummed between them like music, weaving their hearts together with threads that had only grown stronger over time. They'd started as enemies and become lovers. They'd begun as rivals and evolved into partners. They'd transformed conflict into cooperation and hatred into love. And somewhere in the Pacific Northwest, 2 more alpha wolves were about to discover that the best way to win a war was to fall in love with your enemy. The moon rose full and bright through the trees, illuminating the path ahead with silver light. Behind them lay the past, territorial disputes and bitter rivalry, and the long journey toward understanding. Ahead lay the future, new challenges to face, new alliances to build, new love stories to help write. Together, they drove toward whatever came next, secure in the knowledge that they could handle anything as long as they faced it side by side. After all, they'd started with nothing but hatred and managed to build a love story that was reshaping the entire supernatural world. Everything else was just details. The end. Thank you for joining Kira and Damon on their journey from bitter enemies to devoted mates. Their story proves that sometimes the person you're fighting hardest against is the one you're meant to fight alongside forever. If you enjoyed this enemies to lovers werewolf romance, please consider leaving a review and sharing it with other wild hearts who believe in the transformative power of love. Until our next adventure under the moon, keep howling, beautiful souls. Crescent Moon Wolf Face Red Heart.